You are standing on the wooden wharf of a small riverside settlement as the long northern twilight dims the sky to a soft, muted grey, a grey that seems to absorb sound and slow the movement of the world around you. The wharf itself is made of thick, hand-hewn planks, their surfaces worn smooth by years of rain and the passage of many feet, and beneath them you can hear the gentle slap of river water against the tarred log pilings, a sound that is steady and unhurried and somehow already soothing, as if the river itself were breathing slowly in and out. Around you, the air carries a mixture of smells that belong entirely to this place and this moment. The clean, damp scent of wet timber, the faint, sharp tang of pine resin from the nearby forest, the earthy, slightly sour smell of dried fish hung on racks further up the bank, and the intermittent drift of wood smoke that slides across the wharf in thin blue-grey ribbons from the hurt fires of the turf-roofed houses clustered above the shoreline. These houses sit low and dark against the pale evening sky, their thick sod roofs already blending into the dim landscape, their small doorways glowing faintly with the orange light of oil lamps and banked fires within, and from one of them comes the muffled, rhythmic sound of someone grinding grain on a stone quern. A sound so ancient and repetitive it might be the heartbeat of the settlement itself. The ship you will travel on is a trading knarr, a vessel built not for raiding, but for carrying goods along rivers and across open coastal waters, and it rests now beside the wharf with the quiet, patient weight of a sleeping animal. Its broad beam and high rounded prow rise and fall only slightly, with the gentle current that pushes against the hull, the motion so subtle you might not notice it if you were not already attuned to the rhythm of the water. The knarr is clinker-built, its overlapping oak planks fastened with iron rivets and caulked with twisted wool soaked in pine tar, and the whole hull gleams dully in the fading light, dark and solid and deeply trustworthy. A single mast stands amidships, tall and straight and currently bare, the heavy square sail furled loosely around the yardarm and tied with leather straps, and at the stern the steering oar rests in its bracket, its broad blade trailing in the water and making a soft, continuous rippling sound as the current tugs gently against it. The deck is an open space cluttered with the orderly chaos of departure preparations. Coils of hemp rope in various thicknesses lie stacked beside the mast. A pile of folded leather tarpaulins rests near the bow, and a small, barrel-shaped brazier of soapstone sits on a flat stone slab, its embers cold now but ready for the morning, while along the centre line of the ship the cargo space is already filling with goods destined for the trading port at the river's mouth. You are here as a trader, and the goods you will guard and sleep beside for the long journey downstream are being loaded even now, carried down from the settlement storehouses by workers who move with the slow, deliberate pace of people who have done this many times before and see no reason to hurry. Bales of thick woolen wadmal, the dense, felted cloth that is woven in long winter months by the women of the settlement, are passed hand to hand across the gap between wharf and ship, and then stacked neatly amidships, each bale wrapped in coarse linen and tied with twine made from lime bark. The wool has a rich, oily smell, the smell of lanolin and the sheet that once wore it, a smell that is warm and animal and deeply familiar to you because you have lived with it all your life. Beside the wooden bales, bundles of cured reindeer hide are placed carefully, their surfaces still showing the dark, glossy grain of the animal's coat, their edges trimmed square and even, each bundle containing a precise count of 10 hides pressed flat and bound with leather thongs. The hides smell different from the wool, sharper and smokier, a reminder of the curing fires over which they were suspended for days until the skin had absorbed enough smoke to resist rot and damp. A small, sturdy wooden chest reinforced with iron corner brackets is lowered onto the deck next, and though it is not large, its weight makes the ship settle slightly in the water, for inside it are nodules and beads of amber, some polished to a warm, honey-coloured glow, and others still in their rough, cloudy state, smelling faintly of ancient pine resin when you hold them close to your nose, a scent that takes you back to the forest walks you have taken in the autumn, when the trees drip, with the ground is soft with fallen needles. Barrels are loaded too, barrels of rendered seal oil sealed with wooden bungs and wax, their staves dark with age and their iron hoops showing spots of rust, and each one makes a deep hollow thump as it is rolled into its place and wedged securely against its neighbor with coils of straw rope. You find your sleeping place beside the cargo, not because anyone assigns it to you, but because this is where you always sleep when you travel, tucked into the narrow space between a stack of furs and a sturdy barrel that will not shift even in rough water. The space is just wide enough for your body if you lie on your side, and just long enough for you to stretch out your legs until your feet touch the curved planking of the hull, and it feels to you less like a corner of a ship's deck and more like a small private room whose walls are made of the goods you are responsible for. You spread your sheepskin on the deck planks, the fleece side up so that it will cushion you against the hardwood, and you unroll your woolen blanket, a thick, tightly woven cover dyed a faded brown with walnut husks, its edges bound with a simple tablet-woven band in cream and grey. The blanket smells of the storage chest where it has rested for the past weeks, a blend of dried lavender from the meadow above the settlement, and the faint, pleasant mustiness of old wool that has been aired but never washed. And you press it to your face for a moment before laying it flat over the sheepskin so that it will be ready when the night air cools. Around you, the crew move slowly through the last tasks of departure, speaking in voices so low and unhurried that their words blend into the general wash of evening sound, and you cannot distinguish what they are saying because the meaning is not important, only the calm, muted tone of men who know their work and each other and the ship. One of the crew checks the rigging, running his hands along the shrouds from the masthead down to the gunner whale, feeling for any frayed strands of hemp that might give way under strain. And he does this with the slow, rhythmic attention of someone who has learned that patience is the best protection against accident. Another sailor coils a long rope on the deck in a perfect, flat spiral, turning it as he goes, so that the strands lie without twist or kink, and when the coil is complete, he hangs it on a peg set into the mast, where it will stay until the ship needs to tie up at another wharf or a convenient tree on the riverbank. A third crewman, the one who will take the steering oar when the ship is underway, sits on a small wooden crate and sharpens a small knife on a whetstone, the blade making a soft, whispering sound each time it passes across the stone, a sound that rises and falls with the rhythm of his breathing, and occasionally he pauses to test the edge against the hair on his forearm, nodding to himself and then resuming the slow, circular motion of the blade against the grit. There is no rush at all because the tide will not turn for some hours yet, and the ship will wait as long as it needs to wait, for the river does not hurry and neither do those who travel upon it. You watch the current pull at the reeds along the shoreline, a steady, repetitive motion that marks time as softly as a slow breath, the green stalks bending downstream and then springing back when the pressure eases, bending and springing back when the pressure eases, bending and springing back again, in an endless, hypnotic cycle that you find yourself following with your eyes until your mind begins to quiet and the edges of your thoughts blur into the grey twilight. The reeds grow thickly along the bank, their narrow leaves making a faint, dry, rustling sound whenever a small gust of wind passes across them, and among their roots you can see the dark shapes of small fish darting in the shallows, their movements quick, but somehow not startling, just another part of the evening's quiet activity. Further out in the river, the surface of the water is almost perfectly smooth, broken only by the occasional rise of a larger fish that leaves a ring of ripples expanding slowly outward until they dissipate into the general flatness, and the reflection of the pale sky in that smooth surface makes the river look like a long sheet of pewter, heavy and cold and utterly still, except for the faint glassy flow that you can only perceive when you watch a floating leaf drift the wharf and notice how slowly but see. The settlement behind you has grown quieter as the twilight deepens, the sounds of the day giving way to the softer sounds of evening. A dog barks once from somewhere up the slope and then subsides into silence. A door is closed and latched with a wooden bar dropped into its brackets. A child's voice calls out and is answered by a deeper voice, and then both fall quiet, and the grinding of the quern stops so that the only remaining sound from the houses is the soft, distant crackle of hearth siloed the night. The air cools by degrees, not suddenly but gradually, so that you feel it first on your cheeks and the tips of your ears, and you pull your woolen cloak a little closer around your shoulders feeling its familiar weight settle across your back like a comforting hand. Your cloak is held at the neck by a simple bronze brooch. A ring of metal with a long pin slides through the fabric and holds it closed, and you run your thumb over its smooth surface absently, tracing the faint pattern of interlocking lines that someone scratched into the bronze long before you owned it, lines that loop back into themselves without beginning or end, a pattern that means nothing and everything at the same time. The evening has now reached that point where the sky is no longer grey but not yet black, a deep, soft indigo that makes the stars just barely visible if you look straight up, tiny points of light that seem to tremble in the thin air, and the first and brightest of them, the one you call the evening star, though you know it is not a star at all, but a wandering light, hangs low above the dark line of the forest on the opposite bank, steady and calm and impossibly distant. The forest itself is a solid wall of darkness now, the individual trunks of pine and birch having merged into a single, undifferentiated mass that stretches away to the north and south as far as you can see. And somewhere deep within it, an owl calls, a low, soft, hooting note that rises slightly at the end, repeated 3 times, and then followed by a long silence that seems to deepen the darkness even further. The river catches the last faint glow of the sky and holds it, so that the water seems lighter than the land, a pale ribbon winding through the blackness of the sleeping forests, and you think for a moment about all the other travelers who have looked at this same river at this same hour, their thoughts drifting as yours are drifting now into the quiet acceptance of the coming night. The loading is finished now, the last barrel rolled into place, the last bundle of hides secured with an extra length of rope, and one of the crew, a broad-shouldered man with a greying beard and hands that are scarred from years of handling ropes and oars, walks the length of the ship to check every lashing, touching each knot with his fingertips, as if he were greeting old friends. He nods to himself, satisfied, and then turns to the remaining crew who have gathered near the mast, speaking a few quiet words that you do not catch, but which cause 2 of them to move to the bow and begin untying the ropes that hold the knarr to the wharf. The ropes are thick and heavy, made of hemp and slightly stiff from being soaked in river water and dried many times, and they make a soft, rasping sound as they slide through the wooden rings set into the wharf posts, a sound that tells you the journey is about to begin. You sit up slightly in your sleeping space, propping yourself on one elbow so that you can watch the departure, and you feel a small, quiet anticipation that is not excitement exactly, but rather a gentle readiness, a settling of your spirit into the shape of the days ahead. The ship is pushed away from the dock with long poles, their blunt ends pressing against the wooden pilings and then releasing, and the knarr moves sideways into the current with the slow drifting grace of something that belongs entirely to the water, the gap between the hull and the wharf widening inch by inch until the dark water fills it completely and the settlement begins to recede, its turf roofs and wooden walls merging into the general darkness of the shore, until only the faint glow of a single haar remains visible. A small the square woolen sail is hoisted then, the yardarm rising up the mast in a series of steady pulls, the heavy cloth flapping once and then twice before it fills with the light evening breeze and settles into a smooth, taut curve, and the sound of the flapping is replaced by the much softer sound of the wind sliding across the wool, a gentle, continuous hush that will become the background of your days and nights on the river. The steering oar creaks in its bracket as the helmsman adjusts the ship's heading, a long, low sound that reminds you of the groan of old trees in a winter wind, and then even that creaking steadies into a rhythmic, predictable pattern as the ship finds its line in the center of the channel and holds it with only small corrections, the oar moving a hand's width to the left and then back again, left and back again, in a motion so steady you can almost count your heartbeats by it. You settle back into your nest of furs, pulling the woolen blanket up to your chin and resting your head on a folded corner of the sheepskin that is just the right height to support your neck, and you look up at the sail above you, its dark shape blocking out a portion of the sky and making the stars around its edges seem brighter by contrast. The mast creaks softly with each slight roll of the ship, and the water laps against the hull a few inches from your ear, making a sound that is not quite a slap and not quite a gurgle, but something in between, a liquid, intimate murmur that seems to be speaking directly to the part of your mind that is already beginning to drift towards sleep. You can feel the movement of the river beneath you, a slow, powerful, ceaseless motion that rocks the ship from side to side in a rhythm so gentle it is like being held in a large, patient hand, and you let your body go heavy and loose, surrendering your weight to the deck and the cargo and the ship and the river, all of which will carry you through the night without any effort on your part. The air inside your sleeping space is warm from the stored heat of the wool bales and the barrel beside you, and it smells of lanolin and old wood and the faint, distant freshness of the water, and these smells combine with the sounds and the motion into a single, enveloping sensation of safety and quiet and deep, uncomplicated rest. And as the last trace of the settlement's light vanishes around a bend in the river, you close your eyes and let the journey take you. The first light of morning arrives on the river without a sunrise, without any dramatic break in the cloud cover or sudden flood of gold across the water, but rather as a gradual, almost imperceptible lightning that begins somewhere high in the eastern sky and seeps downward through the layers of grey cloud like water soaking slowly through wool. You wake not because the light calls you, but because the rhythm of the ship has changed, and your body, still more asleep than awake, has noticed the difference and brought it to your attention gently, without urgency. The change is this: the creak of the mast and the soft hush of wind across the sail have been joined by a new sound, a steady, rhythmic sound that comes from somewhere forward of your sleeping space, a sound that rises and falls with a cadence as regular as breathing, but deeper and more resonant. The sound of oars dipping into water and pulling through it and lifting out again in an endless, patient cycle. You open your eyes to the dim, close world beneath the canvas awning that the crew must have raised while you slept, a low tent-like space that blocks the direct light of the sky and makes everything beneath it soft and shadowed and warm. The awning is made of heavy, oiled canvas that smells of old leather and linseed and the faint, pleasant mustiness of fabric that has been wet many times and dried many times and will never be entirely new again. And it is supported by a simple framework of poles lashed to the gunwales, creating a shelter over the cargo and over you that turns the deck into a snug, protected chamber. Through the gap between the awning's edge and the hull, you can see a narrow strip of the outside world. And what you see is the color of the river, which has changed from the dark pewter grey of last night to a pale, milky green that seems to glow softly in the diffuse morning light. A color that is cold and calm and somehow restful to look at, like the color of a frozen waterfall in early spring. You shift slightly in your nest of furs, drawing the woolen blanket high around your shoulders, because the morning air is cool, despite the shelter of the awning, cool enough that you can feel it on your cheeks, and in the slight stiffness of your fingers when you uncurl them from the warmth of your chest. The sheepskin beneath you has absorbed your body heat through the night and holds it now like a gift, warm and soft and molded to the shape of your hips and shoulders, and you are reluctant to leave it even as wakefulness settles more firmly into your mind. The rhythmic sound of the oars continues, steady and unhurried, and you count the beats without meaning to, 10 strokes and then 20, 50, 100, until the counting becomes meaningless because the rhythm never varies and never falters and seems as if it will go on forever. A heartbeat for the ship and for the river and for the slow, patient journey downstream. After a time you sit up fully, pushing the blanket aside and feeling the cooler air slide across your arms and neck, and you look around the space beneath the awning at the cargo that surrounds you. The bales of Wadmore wool are still there, stacked neatly against the hull, their coarse linen wrappers showing the faint marks of the settlement storage stamps, simple geometric designs pressed into the fabric with a wooden block dipped in charcoal paste. You reach out and touch the nearest bale, pressing your palm flat against the linen and feeling the dense, resilient spring of the wool beneath, and the bale gives slightly under your hand and then pushes back, as if it were a living thing acknowledging your presence. The bundles of reindeer hide are stacked beside the wool, and you notice that one of the leather thongs has loosened slightly, probably from the working of the ship's motion through the night, so you reach over and pull it tight again, and tie it off with a simple knot that your fingers form without conscious thought, a knot you have tied so many times that it lives now in your hands rather than in your memory. The small wooden chest of amber rests where it was placed last evening, its iron corners dark and solid, and you place your hand on its lid for a moment and feel the faint vibration of the ship's movement transmitted through the wood, a tiny continuous tremor that reminds you that nothing on the river is ever truly still. You crawl to the gap at the edge of the awning and look out across the water, and the first thing you see is the forest on both banks, endless stands of pine and birch that stretch away to the north and south as far as you can see, their trunks straight and dark against the pale sky, their branches interlocking overhead to form a continuous canopy that makes the forest look like a great dark wall with no doors and no windows, a wall that has stood here for longer than any human memory can reach. The trees are the same trees you have seen all your life, the same species of pine with its rough, scaly bark and its clusters of dark needles that whisper constantly in the wind, the same birch with its smooth, papery bark that peels away in thin, curling sheets and catches the light in small flashes of silver. They pass by the ship in a slow, endless procession, each tree much like the last, and yet if you watch them long enough you begin to see the small differences. A pine that has been struck by lightning and has a pale, splintered scar running down its trunk, a birch that leans out over the water at a precarious angle, its roots half exposed where the river has cut gently into the bank, a cluster of alders growing in a low, damp hollow where a small stream feeds into the main river. Their leaves are lighter, more yellow grain than the darker furred foliage around them. The crew are at the oars, 4 men on each side of the ship, and they row with a slow, steady beat that speaks of long practice and no particular hurry, the blades of the oars entering the water with a soft, unified splash, and then pulling through with a sound that is deeper and more resonant, the sound of wood pressing against water, and then lifting out with a drip and a pause before the cycle begins again. The oarsmen sit on wooden chests that serve both as seats and as storage for their personal belongings, and they face aft, looking toward you and the steering oar, their bodies moving in a rhythm so coordinated that it seems to come from a single shared instinct rather than from individual effort, their backs straightening and bending, their arms pulling and releasing, their breath rising and falling in time with the stroke. They do not speak to each other because there is no need for speech when the rhythm is this well established, and the only sounds they make are the sounds of their work. The creak of the oar looms against the wooden tholes, the soft grunt of effort that escapes from one man at the end of a long pull, the shuffle of a foot repositioning itself on the deck, planks. One of them, the broad-shouldered man who checked the rigging last night, catches your eye and gives a small nod that is not quite a greeting and not quite an acknowledgement, but something in between, a simple recognition that you are awake and that the day has begun and that all is as it should be. Because the wind is light this morning, barely enough to stir the surface of the river into small, irregular patches of ripple that catch the pale light and then smooth out again, the sail hangs loosely from the yardarm, its woolen fabric stirring only occasionally when a slightly stronger gust pushes across the deck and makes it billow inward for a moment before subsiding. The helmsman stands at the steering oar, his broad hands resting lightly on the carved wooden tiller, and he makes only the smallest adjustments to the ship's heading, moving the oar a fraction to the left and then a fraction back again, his eyes fixed on some point far ahead that you cannot see, perhaps a marker on the bank or simply the shape of the river as it curves gently between the forest walls. He, like the oarsman, does not speak, and his silence is not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but rather the silence of someone whose entire attention is absorbed by the task of keeping the ship in the deepest, safest part of the channel, where the current runs smooth and the risk of grounding on a hidden sandbar is smallest. You spend the first part of the morning attending to the small, repetitive tasks that are your responsibility as the guardian of the cargo. Tasks so simple and so familiar that they require almost no thought, leaving your mind free to drift as it pleases while your hands work. You begin by checking the lashings on the woolen bales, running your fingers along the ropes that hold them in place, and feeling for any section that has worked loose during the night, and you find one rope that has stretched slightly and now feels slack against the bale. So you untie the knot and pull the rope tight again, feeling the hemp fibers bite into the wool rucker, and then you retie the knot with the same simple, reliable hitch that you have used since you first learned to secure a load on a moving ship. The rope is rough against your palms, and the fibers leave a faint, dusty residue on your skin that smells of the hemp fields where the plants were grown and retted and beaten into long, strong strands. And you rub your hands together to brush away the dust and then move on to the next bale. After the wool, you check the barrels of seal oil, leaning close to each one and sniffing around the bung to make sure no oil has seeped out during the night. And the smell that greets you is rich and fatty and slightly fishy. A smell that reminds you of the seal hunts you have witnessed along the coast. The hunters in their small, skin-covered boats. The sudden, slick black heads appearing in the grey water. And the long, slow process of rendering the blubber into oil over low fires. A prostates at tights in the bungs are all tight, the wax seals intact, and you nod to yourself in satisfaction and move on to the bundles of hide, counting them quietly under your breath as you touch each one, the numbers forming in your mind and then disappearing as soon as they are confirmed, leaving no trace behind because the count has not changed and there is no reason to remember it. At midday, or what you judge to be midday by the position of the pale, diffuse disk of the sun behind the cloud cover, the helmsman calls out a single word in a voice that is low and calm, and the oarsmen stop rowing and lay their oars across their laps, the blades dripping water onto the deck in a slow, irregular patter that sounds like the last drops of a rain shower. The ship drifts then, the sail still hanging loose and useless, and the current carries you along at its own pace, which is slow and smooth and almost imperceptible, so that if you did not watch the bank you might think the ship had stopped entirely and was resting motionless on the surface of the river. The crew take their meal from a common store of food kept in a wooden chest near the mast, and one of them, a younger man with a fair beard and a missing front tooth, offers you a share of it with a simple gesture, holding out a piece of flatbread and a strip of dried fish, and you accept with a nod and a quiet word of thanks. The flatbread is dry and slightly hard, baked days ago on a flat stone griddle and stored wrapped in a linen cloth, and it has the simple, honest taste of barley flour and water and nothing else. A taste that is so familiar it is almost like tasting your own past, and you chew it slowly, letting it soften in your mouth before you swallow. The dried fish is cod, split open and dried on wooden racks in the cold spring wind until it had become stiff and translucent, and it is salty and chewy and intensely savory, a flavor that fills your mouth and makes you thirsty, so you drink from the small wooden water bottle that hangs from your belt, the water cool and slightly tasting of the river from which it was drawn this morning, a taste that is clean and faintly mineral and somehow refreshing despite its plainness. You eat, leaning against the barrel beside your sleeping space, watching the forest slide past and listening to the quiet conversations of the crew, their voices low and unhurried and full of the comfortable silences that exist between people who have traveled together many times before. The afternoon brings no change in the weather, no sudden wind or clearing sky or shift in temperature, just a long, unhurried glide past identical trees and the occasional call of a distant bird, a cuckoo perhaps, or a woodpecker tapping against a hollow trunk somewhere deep in the forest where no human ear can hear it except by accident. The oarsmen have resumed their rowing after the meal, but the rhythm seems even slower now, as if the food has settled into their bodies and made them heavier and more content, and the ship moves downstream with the same steady, patient pace that it has kept all morning, a pace that feels less like traveling and more like simply existing in a different place each time you look up at the bank, the forest rearranging itself into new configurations of pine and birch and a boulder that are fundamentally identical to the configurations of part and pine, and a bird that are made bashban at the frightful. You spend the afternoon sitting cross-legged on your sheepskin, your back against the barrel, and you take out the small leather pouch of amber beads that you carry with you always, not because the beads are yours, but because you like to hold them and look at them and feel their strange, light warmth in your palm. You pour a few of them out into your hand, perhaps a dozen beads and 3 or 4 rough, unpolished nodules, and you arrange them on the sheepskin in front of you, pushing them into lines and circles, and then scattering them and starting again, a mindless, repetitive activity that occupies your hands while your thoughts wander far away. or nide knotting T10 salivin note-like filters through the awning and grows, cratting it slowly and watching the light move across its surface, and inside the bead there is a tiny dark inclusion, perhaps a fragment of ancient bark or a single grain of sand that was trapped in the resin millions of years ago, when the tree that produced it still stood in some long-vanished forest, and you think about that tree and that forest and all the time that has betrayed, pleasant when the fast, and maured as so adzard to krat and stivusp. When evening begins to approach, the light changing from pale grey to a deeper, softer grey, that makes the trees on the bank seem to draw closer together, and the river take on a darker, more opaque quality. The helmsman guides the ship toward a shallow, reedy bend where the current is almost still, and the oarsmen ship their oars and take up the long poles instead, pushing the knarr gently into the shallows until the hull brushes against the soft, muddy bottom. The travel settling motion travels through the Beckeldian to travel swiftly. Intenditual and court. You are already half asleep by the time the anchor stone is dropped over the side, with its muffled, liquid splash, your body swaying gently with the remembered motion of the river, even though the ship is now still, and you pull your blanket up around your ears and close your eyes, listening to the first quiet rustle of the reeds against the hull and the distant, rhythmic call of a cuckoo somewhere in the birch forest. And you let yourself sink down into sleep without resistance, knowing that tomorrow will be another day exactly like this one, and that this it's canny. The knarr is guided toward the shallow, reedy bend as the last of the daylight fades from the sky, and the helmsman makes this decision with the same quiet, unhurried certainty with which he has made every decision on the journey, reading the river and the shape of the bank and the depth of the water as easily as you might read the familiar grain of a well-worn wooden tool handle. The oarsmen have shipped their oars now, and two of them stand at the bow with the long poles, pressing the blunt ends down into the soft mud of the riverbed and pushing the ship slowly toward the bank, where a thick stand of reeds grows in water so shallow that the hull begins to brush against the submerged stems with a sound that is soft and dry and continuous, a gentle, papery whispering that seems to welcome the shepter into the shelter of the bend. The reeds are tall and pale in the twilight, their feathery tops nodding slightly in the light evening breeze, and they stretch away along the shoreline in both directions until they merge into the general darkness of the forest beyond, a broad protective margin between the open water and the solid land. The ship comes to rest with a slow, barely perceptible settling motion, the rounded bottom of the hull pressing into the soft silt of the riverbed and then stopping, held gently by the mud and the friction of the keel against the bottom, and the entire vessel seems to exhale after the long day of motion, becoming still and heavy and deeply settled. One of the crew lifts the heavy stone anchor from its place near the bow, a roughly shaped slab of granite with a hole bored through its center and a thick rope passed through and knotted securely, and he lowers it over the side hand over hand, the rope sliding through his palms with a soft, steady hissing sound, until the anchor touches the bottom with a muffled, liquid thump that you feel through the deck planks as much as you hear it. A deep, final sound at the night's rest and the beginning of the night's rest. This portion of the evening is devoted entirely to the settling of the ship for the night, a process so calm and so predictable that it becomes, in its own quiet way, a ritual of rest, a series of small, familiar actions performed in a sequence that never varies because it has been refined over countless evenings on countless rivers, until it has become as natural and unthinking as breathing. You rise from your sleeping space and join the crew in these tasks, not because anyone asks you to, but because you are part of the ship's company now, and the work is light and soothing, and requires no conversation, only the quiet shared understanding of people who know what needs to be done, and do it together in the gathering darkness. The first task is the furling of the sail, and you walk to the mast and stand beside one of the crew, a lean, dark-bearded man whose hands move with the slow, precise efficiency of long practice. And together you pull on the ropes that control the yardarm, lowering it slightly so that the heavy woolen cloth can be gathered and tied. The sail is still damp from the mist of the morning, and it smells strongly of wet wool and old weather, a smell that is sharp and clean and somehow comforting, and as you gather a fold of the fabric in your arms and pull it close to your chest, you can feel the cold, dense weight of it, the same weight that has pushed the ship downstream for days now, a weight that seems almost alive in its heaviness and its bulk. The crewman beside you begins to tie the furled sail to the yardarm with short lengths of leather cord, wrapping each one around the gathered cloth and pulling it tight with a quick, firm motion. And you help him by holding the folds in place while he ties, your hands working together in the dim light without any need for words, the rhythm of the work passing between you through the shared contact with the fabric and the ropes. When the sail is secure, you move to help with the awning, and this is a task you have come to appreciate for the way it transforms the open deck into a sheltered, intimate space that feels separate from the vast darkness of the river and the sky. The awning is made of heavy oiled canvas that has been folded and stored near the mast during the day, and you help to unroll it across the framework of poles that the crew have already set up over the cargo area, pulling the canvas taut and securing its edges to the gunwales with wooden toggles that fit into loops sewn along the hem. The canvas is stiff and cold in your hands, and it crackles slightly as it unrolls, releasing a smell of linseed oil and old leather and the faint, pleasant mustiness of fabric that has been wet and dried and wet again many times over many seasons. A smell that seems to contain within it the memory of all the other nights. This awning has sheltered travelers on this river and on other rivers far away. When the awning is in place, it creates a low, tent-like space over the cargo and over your sleeping spot, a space that is dark and warm and close, and you duck under its edge and stand for a moment in the quiet dimness, listening to the canvas stir slightly in the breeze and feeling the day's accumulated tension begin to drain out of your shoulders and your back. Beneath the awning, you arrange your sleeping furs again, and this is a task that belongs entirely to you, a small private ritual that you perform each evening with the same careful attention, smoothing the sheepskin flat on the deck planks and fluffing the woolen blanket so that it traps as much air as possible and will hold the warmth of your body through the cold hours of the night. The sheepskin is still warm from the morning, its fleece soft and slightly matted where you have lain on it for many hours, and you run your palm across it in slow circular motions, feeling the fibers lift and separate under your touch, the lanolin and the wool leaving a faint greasy residue on your skin that smells of sheep and meadows and the distant hills where the animal was raised and sheared. Your blanket has acquired a few small pieces of straw and a speck of dried leaf from the deck, and you pick these off one by one and drop them over the side of the ship, watching them disappear into the dark water below without a sound, and then you fold the blanket in half lengthwise and lay it on the sheepskin with the folded edge toward the hull, creating a pocket of warmth that you will slide into later when the night air has cooled and the stars have come out. One of the crew lights a small clay oil lamp, and this is the moment when the space beneath the awning changes from a dark, functional shelter into something softer and more peaceful. The small flame casting a warm golden glow that pushes back the shadows and makes the faces of your companions visible again, their features lit in soft gold and their eyes reflecting the tiny point of light. The lamp is a simple object, a shallow bowl of fired clay with a pinched spout that holds a wick of twisted wool, and it burns seal oil from one of the barrels in the cargo, the flame steady and bright and giving off a faint, pleasant smell that is not quite smoke and not quite oil, but something in between, a smell that fills the space beneath the awning and mingles with the other smells of wool and wood and river until the air itself seems to have a texture, thick and warm and deeply soothing. The lamp is hung from a small hook set into the awning pole above your head, and it swings very slightly with the gentle rocking of the ship, making the shadows sway and shift in a slow, hypnotic dance that you find yourself watching without any conscious thought, your eyes following the movement of the light across the rough surface of the woolen bales and the dark curve of the oil barrels and the sleeping shapes of the other crew members who have already settled into their own resting places around the deck. Now the ship is quiet, quieter than it has been at any other time during the day, because the sounds of travel have been replaced by the sounds of rest, and these new sounds are softer and more intermittent, and somehow more intermittent, and somehow more intimate, as if the night itself was speaking in a low, confidential voice, meant only for those who are still awake to hear it. The first of these sounds is the constant, gentle rustle of the reeds against the hull, a sound that you noticed earlier, but that has grown louder now that the ship is still and the night is calm. the dry, hollow stems rubbing against the oak planks with a soft, papery susurration that rises and falls with the slight movements of the water, sometimes fading almost to nothing, and then returning in a long, slow wave of whispering that seems to travel along the entire length of the ship, from bow to stern. The reeds are so close that you could reach out and touch them if you wanted to, and you can see their dark shapes swaying against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky, their feathery tops outlined against the faint glow of the first stars that are beginning to appear through the thinning cloud cover. The second sound is the occasional soft plop of a fish rising to the surface somewhere out in the dark water beyond the reeds, a sound that is small and round and perfect, a single note in the night's quiet music that comes without warning and fades immediately into silence, leaving behind only the memory of the ripples that must be spreading outward in the darkness, invisible but real, widening and widening until they touch the hull and are absorbed without any sign. You listen for these plops and find yourself counting them without meaning to, one and then another, and then a long pause and then a third, and the counting blends into the rhythm of your breathing and the slow, steady beat of your heart, all of these rhythms merging together into a single, peaceful cadence that seems to mark the passage of time without any urgency or demand. The third sound, and the one that you will come to associate most closely with these nights on the river, is the distant, rhythmic call of a cuckoo somewhere in the birch forest on the far bank, a sound that is low and soft and repetitive, two notes repeated over and over with a long pause between each pair, a call that seems to be asking a question and then answering it and then asking it again in an endless, patient cycle that has been going on after it has left. The cuckoo's call carries across the water with a strange, ventriloquial quality that makes it seem closer than it really is, and you imagine the bird perched on a branch somewhere in the dark forest, its body still and its beak opening and closing with the same slow, mechanical regularity as the oars dipping into the river. And the thought is comforting somehow, the idea that there is another creature awake in the night keeping time with you. You lie on your back in your sleeping furs now, the sheepskin soft beneath you and the woolen blanket pulled up to your chin, and you look up at the canvas awning above your head, where the small flame of the oil lamp casts a faint, wavering circle of light that is the color of honey and autumn leaves. The ship rocks barely enough to notice, a motion that is less a movement and more a suggestion of movement, the river breathing gently beneath the hull and lifting it and lowering it with a rhythm that is so slow and so subtle that it might be the rhythm of the earth itself turning in its sleep. You feel your body settling into the deck planks, your weight distributed across the sheepskin and the cargo and the ship and the water, all of these layers holding you and supporting you and carrying you through the night without any effort on your part. And the feeling is one of deep, complete, uncomplicated safety, a safety that you have felt on every night of this journey, and that you will feel on every night still to come. The other crew members are sleeping now, their breathing slow and even and barely audible beneath the rustle of the reeds and the distant call of the cuckoo, and their presence around you is a comfort in itself. The knowledge that you are not alone in the darkness, but are surrounded by people who share the same small, floating world and who trust each other and the ship and the river. One of them shifts in his sleep and mumbles something too soft to understand, and then he sighs and settles again, and the sound of that sigh is so human and so peaceful that it makes you smile slightly to yourself, in the darkness, a small private expression that no one sees and that fades from your face as quickly as it came. You think, as you always do at this hour, about the journey still ahead, the long, slow miles of river that wind between the forested banks and the wide, open stretches where the water spreads out like a lake, and the sky seems to grow larger and the stars become brighter. And you think about the port at the river's mouth where the cargo will be unloaded and traded for other goods that will travel back up the river with you on the return journey, goods that you cannot yet imagine, but that will have their own smells and their own twiced storators. But these thoughts are distant and abstract, and they drift through your mind without catching hold, passing across your awareness like clouds across the face of the moon, and you let them go without effort, returning your attention to the immediate, physical sensations of the present moment, the softness of the sheepskin under your cheek, the warmth of the blanket around your shoulders, the smell of the oil lamp and the damp wool and the river, or the constant, gentle, reassuring sound of the reeds against the hull, which has become so narrate. that muddied night light. The flame in the oil lamp burns lower as the night deepens, the wick consuming the last of the oil in the shallow clay bowl, and the light grows dimmer and dimmer until it is just a faint, flickering point of orange that barely illuminates the canvas above your head. And then it goes out entirely with a soft, almost inaudible sigh, leaving the space beneath the awning in complete darkness. But the darkness is not frightening or oppressive. It is a soft, close, comfortable darkness that wraps around you like another blanket, and you close your eyes and let yourself drift, your mind moving slowly through the last fragmented images of the day. The pale green of the river in the morning light, the dark trunks of the pines passing in their endless procession, the honey-colored glow of the amber bead in your palm, and the face of the helmsman as he guided the ship into the reeds, calm and steady and completely adapt. These images rise and fall and fade into one another, and soon the only thing you are aware of is the scent of wool, the quiet, and the slow, inevitable surrender to sleep that has been waiting for you all along. You wake to a world made entirely of fog, a thick, damp whiteness that has risen from the river during the night and now presses close against the ship on all sides, muffling every sound and hiding both banks from view, as completely as if the knarr had been wrapped in a blanket of raw wool. The fog is so dense that you cannot see the bow from your sleeping space, cannot see the mast or the yardarm or even the edge of the awning above your head, and the only indication that the world outside still exists is the gentle, steady rock of the hull against the soft mud of the riverbed, and the faint, distant lap of water, somewhere out in the whiteness, a sound that seems to come from every direction at once, and from no direction at all. The air beneath the awning is cold and moist, and it smells of wet canvas and damp wool, and the clean, almost metallic scent of the fog itself, which is condensed into tiny droplets on every surface, beading on the oiled leather of the tarpaulins and running in slow, irregular rivulets down the oak planks of the hull. You lie still for a long time, longer than usual, because the fog has created a kind of pause in the rhythm of the journey, a space between one day and the next where nothing is expected to happen and nothing does happen, and you let yourself drift in this pause without any sense of urgency or obligation. The crew are awake. You can hear them moving quietly on the deck beyond the awning, but their movements are slow and hushed, their voices lowered to murmurs that are swallowed by the fog almost before they are spoken, and you know from these sounds that no one intends to row until the mist begins to lift, for it would be pointless and dangerous to move on the river when the helmsman cannot see the channel or the banks or the shape of the water ahead. So there is a long still hour when nothing happens, when the ship rests motionless in the grey-white silence and the only movement is the slow, continuous drift of condensation along the wool fibers of the awning, where thousands of tiny droplets are gathering and merging and growing, heavy enough to fall, one by one, onto the deck planks, with a soft, irregular patter that is the only sound in the quiet. You shift in your furs and pull the blanket higher around your ears, feeling the pleasant, residual warmth of your body trapped beneath the wool, and you watch the droplets on the awning with the kind of aimless, unfocused attention that belongs only to early mornings when there is no need to rise and no reason to hurry. Each droplet forms slowly, a small milky grey pearl that trembles with the almost imperceptible rocking of the ship, and when it falls it leaves behind a thin, wet trail that glistens for a moment before being replaced by new condensation, and the pattern repeats itself over and over, endlessly and soothingly, until you find that your eyes have closed again and your breathing has slowed to match the rhythm of the falling drops. You are not asleep and you are not awake, but somewhere in the soft, borderless territory between, where thoughts lose their sharp edges and drift like the fog itself, formless and quiet. After some uncounted span of time, a change begins to work its way through the fog, a change so gradual that you do not notice it at first, but only become aware of it after it has already progressed, the way you might notice that a room has grown darker long after the sun has actually set. The grey-white of the fog is lightening, slowly and imperceptibly, taking on a faint, pearlescent quality that suggests the sun is higher now and pressing against the mist from above, and the world outside the ship begins to reveal itself in small, tentative glimpses. First, the outline of the mast, a dark, vertical shadow in the whiteness, then the curve of the bow, then the tops of the reeds, which emerge from the fog like the tips of spears, pale and ghostly and perfectly still. The fog itself has begun to move now, not dispersing but drifting in slow horizontal currents that shift and eddy around the ship, and through the gaps that open in these currents you can see fragments of the river, patches of flat grey water that appear and disappear as the mist closes and opens again. A slow, silent dance that is mesmerizing in its gentle unpredictability. One of the crew, the broad-shouldered man with the greying beard, appears at the edge of the awning and crouches down to speak to you, his voice low and rough from sleep, but not unkind. And he tells you that they will break their fast and then push off as soon as the fog has cleared enough to see the far bank. And you nod and sit up and begin to fold your blanket, the familiar, automatic motions of the morning routine settling your mind into wakefulness. The cold air bites at your hands and face as you emerge from beneath the awning, and you can see now that the deck is wet with dew and fog drip, the planks dark and slick underfoot, and the crew are moving about with the same slow, careful steps, their cloaks pulled tight around their shoulders and their breath pluming in small, white clouds that are quickly absorbed by the lingering mist. The brazier of soapstone has been lit, and a small fire of birch twigs crackles quietly inside it, the smoke rising straight up through the fog and disappearing, and one of the younger crewmen is heating a pot of river water into which he will crumble dried herbs and a pinch of salt to make a thin, warm broth that will be shared among everyone. A broth that tastes of wood smoke and the faint bitterness of the herbs and the simple, life-giving warmth of hot liquid on a cold morning. You drink your share of the broth from a wooden cup that has been polished smooth by years of use, and you eat another piece of the flatbread, which is harder today than it was yesterday, but still good, still nourishing, still familiar, and you watch as the fog continues to lift, rising from the river in great slow sheets that peel away from the water and drift upward into the grey sky, revealing more and more of the world with each passing minute. The far bank emerges first as a dark line of treetops, then as a solid wall of pine and birch, their trunks wet and dark from the mist, and then the nearer bank becomes visible too, the reeds and the mud and the low, grassy slope that leads up to the forest, and finally the river itself is fully revealed, a broad, smooth expanse of water, the colour of unpolished pewter, its surface broken only by the occasional drift of mist that still clings to the surface like a ghost of the fog, which the crew take up their oars again, and the ship is pushed off from the mud with the long poles, the blunt ends sinking deep into the silt, and then releasing with a soft sucking sound, and the knarr drifts out into the current and turns its bow downstream, and soon the rhythm of the oars has resumed, slow and steady and deeply familiar, a heartbeat for the ship and for the river and for the slow, patient journey that continues without end. The mist still lingers in the hollows and bends of the river, and you pass through patches of it that drape across the water like thin, wet fabric, and each time the ship enters one of these patches, the sounds of the world are muffled again, and the air grows cold and damp, and the crew become dark, indistinct shapes in the whiteness, and then the ship emerges again into the grey daylight, and the world returns, the forest and the sky, and the pale milky green water that stretches ahead of you, toward the sea. By mid-morning, the fog has burned away entirely, leaving behind a sky that is high and pale and uniform, a single, seamless layer of cloud that diffuses the sunlight into a soft, directionless glow that casts no shadows and makes the whole world look flat and calm and slightly unreal, like a painting on a wall. The helmsman, who has been watching the bank with his usual quiet attention, calls out a few soft words to the oarsmen, and the ship begins to angle toward the eastern bank, where a small dark opening in the forest wall marks the mouth of a tributary stream that joins the main river. You have seen this place marked on the rough, mental map you carry of this river, a map built up over many journeys and passed on by other traders in the form of simple directions and remembered landmarks. There is a station here, a collection of 3 or 4 wooden buildings set on a cleared patch of shore where the stream provides fresh water, and the river provides a natural harbour for boats like yours. As the knarr approaches the tributary, the details of the station resolve slowly out of the grey light, taking on form and substance with each stroke of the oars. There are 4 buildings in total, all of them made of the same dark, weathered timber as the ship, their walls constructed from split logs chinked with moss and clay, their roofs laid with thick slabs of birch bark held down by stones and cross poles, and each building is low and long and sits close to the ground as if it were trying to disappear into the landscape, which it very nearly does against the dark backdrop of the forest. The largest of the buildings has a wide open doorway facing the river, and from this doorway comes the warm orange glow of a hearth fire and the faint, pleasant smell of wood smoke and something cooking, a smell that is rich and savory and that makes your stomach tighten with a sudden, surprising hunger despite the bread you ate only a few hours ago. A simple log jetty extends out into the river from the cleared shore, its pilings driven deep into the mud and its deck planks grey with age and weather, and two small boats are tied up alongside it, both of them fishing vessels with narrow hulls and folded nets piled in their sterns. The knarr is guided alongside the jetty with the same slow, careful precision that the helmsman uses for every docking, the long poles pressing against the riverbed and the oars backing water on one side to swing the heavy hull parallel to the dock, and then the ropes are thrown and caught and looped over the wooden bollards, and the ship comes to rest against the jetty with a gentle bump that is cushioned by the bundles of reed that have been hung over the side as fenders. You step onto the wharf for the first time in several days, and your legs feel strange on the solid, unmoving planks, as if the ground itself was swaying slightly beneath you, a phantom echo of the river's motion that your body has grown so accustomed to that it has forgotten how to stand still. You take a few steps and then stop, waiting for the sensation to pass, and you look around at the station while your body remembers the steadiness of the earth. The station is quiet as the ship at anchor, and the people who live here have come out of the buildings to meet you, moving with the same slow, unhurried pace that seems to characterize everyone who lives along this river. There is a man and a woman and an older child, all of them dressed in thick woolen tunics and leggings and soft leather shoes, their faces weathered and calm and neither welcoming nor unwelcoming, but simply present, simply here, as much a part of the station as the buildings and the jetty and the dark forest behind. The man carries a wooden bucket in one hand and the woman holds a small covered basket under her arm, and they approach the ship without speaking, their eyes moving over the cargo with the practiced assessment of people who have seen many such loads and know exactly what they need and what they can offer in return. There is a brief, quiet exchange of goods that unfolds without any bargaining or loud words, for bargaining would be out of place here, where the river dictates the pace of all things and the value of goods is understood by everyone, without the need for discussion. The man sets down his bucket, which is full of fresh water drawn from the tributary stream, water that is cold and clear and tastes of the forest and the moss and the deep, clean earth, and one of the crew lifts it aboard and carries it to the water barrel near the mast, where it will be poured in to replenish the supply that has been used over the past days. The woman opens her basket and shows the contents to you, for you are the trader and the cargo is in your care, and inside the basket is a round of goat cheese wrapped in nettle leaves, the leaves still green and fresh and slightly damp, and the cheese itself is pale and firm and has the sharp, tangy smell of goat's milk that has been curdled and pressed and aged in a cool, dark storehouse. You nod and accept the cheese, and in return you offer a small barrel of seal oil, one of the smaller barrels that was loaded at the settlement, and the woman takes it and lifts it to her shoulder with the ease of someone who has carried many such burdens, and she carries it back to the largest building and disappears through the dark doorway into the warm, smoky interior. While this exchange is happening, you and one of the crewmen walk up the slope to the tributary stream to refill the ship's drinking bottles, and the path is narrow and packed hard by the passage of many feet, winding between stumps of cleared trees and patches of low, wiry grass that is still wet with the morning's fog. The stream is small and clear, and runs over a bed of smooth, rounded pebbles in shades of grey and brown, and the water makes a soft, continuous gurgling sound as it flows down toward the river, a sound that is high and musical and completely different from the deep, liquid hush of the main channel. You kneel on the bank and lower your wooden bottle into the current, watching the water flow over the rim and fill the container with a slow, patient certainty, and you drink from the stream directly, cupping your hands and lifting the water to your mouth, and it is so cold that it makes your teeth ache, and so clean that it tastes of nothing at all, just the pure, essential taste of water itself. When you return to the jetty, the exchange is complete, and the woman has reappeared from the building with another small item. A scat of dried apples that she offers the shoe with a quiet word and a slight nod, and you take the sack and feel the weight of it, the hard, leathery slices of apple pressing against each other inside the rough linen, and you thank her in the same quiet tone, and then you carry the sack back to the ship and place it in your sleeping space beside. The small chode is slow with spatent days, adolved or hated sifminses butts. He spent a looker on the shore, walking slowly around the station and looking at the small, neat abyss. The fishing nets hung on wooden racks to dry, their mesh fine alternating layers. The fishing nets hung on wooden racks to dry, their mesh fine and dark and smelling of the river. The small garden plot behind the buildings where rows of cabbages and turnips are growing in the rich black soil, their leaves broad and green and wet, with the smokehouse, a small wicket is written base cheers with across These details settle into your memory quietly, without any effort, and you know that you will recall them later, perhaps on another journey, when you pass this station again and find it unchanged, or perhaps on a night when you are far away and the memory of this quiet, ordinary place will come back to you as a small, private comfort. The time comes to leave, as it always does, and you return to the ship and step across the gap between the jetty and the deck, feeling the familiar, living motion of the hull beneath your feet with a sense of quiet welcome, as if the ship had been waiting for you and is glad to have you back. The ropes are untied and coiled. The poles push the knarr away from the jetty, and the oars resume their steady rhythm, and as the ship slides back into the current, you turn to look at the station one last time, watching the buildings grow smaller and smaller until they are just a smudge of smoke against the dark wall of the forest. And then even the smoke fades and merges into the grey sky, and the station is gone, as if it had never existed, a brief quiet pause in the long slow journey that continues without end. By the 5th day of travel, the river has widened into a great slow-moving expanse, where the banks are so far apart they appear as faint green lines on the horizon, and the world seems to have opened up around the ship in a way that makes the previous days feel like a different journey altogether. The change did not happen suddenly but gradually, so gradually that you only noticed it when you looked toward the shore and realized that the dark, distinct trunks of the pine trees had become a thin, continuous smudge of color, a watercolor wash of deep green and muted brown that trembled slightly in the warm, hazy air. The river now is less like a channel and more like a long, narrow lake, its surface so broad and so calm that the sky is perfectly mirrored on it. The pale grey clouds and the occasional flash of a gull's wing reflected with such clarity that it is sometimes difficult to tell where the water ends and the air begins. The current has slowed too, spreading its strength across the wide basin so that the ship moves with a lazy, almost imperceptible drift, that you feel less as motion and more as a gentle, continuous pressure against the hull, a soft hand that pushes you downstream without any sense of hurry. The sailing is easy today, the wind steady from behind and just strong enough to fill the square woolen sail into a smooth, taut curve that pulls the knarr along without the need for oars. The crew have shipped their oars and now sit on their sea chests or lean against the gunwales, their hands idle and their faces turned toward the distant shore, their silence broken only by an occasional quiet word or a soft laugh that carries across the deck and then fades into the hush of the bow wave. The helmsman stands at the steering oar with his usual calm attention, but even his movements are slower today, the small corrections he makes to the ship's heading so slight that the oar seems to move of its own accord, responding to the river's subtle suggestions rather than to any human command. One of the crew adjusts the sheet occasionally, loosening or tightening the rope that controls the angle of the sail, and each adjustment is made with a slow, unhurried pull, the hemp rope sliding through the wooden block with a soft, sleepy creak that sounds like the ship itself yawning. You spend the first part of the morning sitting on the deck with your back against the familiar barrel, watching the wide water and the distant banks and the slow, steady progress of the clouds across the pale dome of the sky. The air is mild today, not cold and not warm, but something in between, a temperature that you do not notice because it asks nothing of your body, neither shivering nor sweating, and you let your cloak fall open at the throat and loosen the brooch so that the fabric hangs loosely from your shoulders. The smell of the river has changed too. It is less earthy now and more open, carrying a faint, clean, slightly mineral scent that you associate with deep water and wide horizons, and mixed with this is the distant, occasional hint of something you cannot quite name, a freshness that might be the first trace of the salt sea still many days ahead, or might simply be the clean air of the open basin sweeping away the closer, denser smells of the forest. After a time, you turn your attention to the cargo beside you, not because it needs checking, but because you have come to think of it as a companion on this journey, a silent, patient presence that shares the deck with you and the crew and the slow, steady rhythm of the river. You run your hand along the coarse linen wrapper of the nearest wool bale, feeling the familiar, resilient spring of the wadmal beneath, and you notice that the bale has settled slightly during the days of travel, its shape conforming more closely to the curve of the hull and the weight of the bales stacked above it. The bundles of reindeer hide are still secure, their leather thongs tight and dry, and you tap the nearest barrel of seal oil with your knuckle, hearing the deep, solid thunk that tells you the barrel is full and sound and has not leaked a single drop. But it is not the wool or the hides or the oil that draws your hand today. It is the small, iron-cornered chest of amber that rests in its place near your sleeping space, its dark wooden lid closed and its presence somehow heavier than its size would suggest, as if the ancient, fossilized resin inside it were pressing against the walls of the chest with the weight of all the millennia it has existed. You lift the chest and place it on your lap, feeling the solid, satisfying heft of it, and you work the simple iron latch with your thumb, the metal cool and slightly rough under your skin, and then you open the lid and look inside. The amber fills the chest to within a few inches of the top, a jumble of polished beads and rough, unworked nodules that catch the diffuse grey light and glow with a warmth that seems to come from within the stones themselves, a deep, honey-coloured radiance that is the only truly warm thing in the whole, pale, muted landscape. You reach in and take out a handful of the pieces, perhaps a dozen beads and 4 or 5 rough nodules, and you close the lid and set the chest aside, spreading the amber on the deck in front of you, where you can see each piece clearly against the dark wood of the planks. The polished beads are the ones you like best, and you sort them from the rough pieces with the tip of your finger, pushing them into a small, neat pile that gleams softly in the grey light. Each bead is slightly different from the others, though they were all made by the same hands in the same workshop, and you pick them up one by one and examine them with the slow, patient attention of someone who has no other task and no desire to be anywhere else. The first bead is round and smooth and the colour of dark honey, and when you hold it up to the sky you can see through its translucent surface to the tiny dark inclusion trapped at its centre, a speck of ancient bark or a fragment of a long-dead insect that was caught in the resin millions of years ago and has been preserved there ever since, suspended in a golden eternity that will last long after you and the ship and the river itself have all passed away. The second bead is paler, more yellow, and it has a cloudy centre that diffuses the light into a soft, milky glow, and you turn it over in your fingers, feeling its strange, light warmth. A warmth that is not heat exactly, but something more subtle, a quality of the material itself that seems to absorb the cold and return it as comfort. The third bead is darker, almost orange, and it has a small crescent-shaped crack inside it that catches the light and sparkles faintly when you tilt it at just the right angle, a tiny, secret flaw that makes it unique among all the other beads in the chest. You pick up one of the rough nodules next, a lump of amber that has not been polished or shaped, but is still in its natural state, its surface irregular and matte and faintly pitted, and you rub it gently with your thumb, feeling the slight resinous tackiness that even after millions of years remains on the surface of the stone. When you rub the nodule more firmly, pressing it against your palm and moving it in slow circular motions, a faint, clean scent rises from it. The scent of ancient pine forests and sun-warmed sap, a scent that is so faint you might be imagining it, and yet so distinct that it immediately transports you to an autumn walk, through a forest where the pines dripped with clear, sticky resin and the ground was soft with fallen needles. You hold the nodule to your nose and breathe in deeply, closing your eyes. And for a moment, you are not on the river at all, but standing in that long-ago forest, surrounded by trees that were old before your grandfather's grandfather was born. And the sensation is so vivid and so peaceful that you hold it as long as you can, letting it fade slowly and naturally, rather than pushing it away. The other crew members have noticed you with the amber, and one of them, the young man with the missing tooth who shared his flatbread with you on the first day, walks over and crouches beside you, looking at the beads spread out on the deck with the simple open curiosity of someone who has seen amber before but never grows tired of it. He does not speak, and neither do you, but after a moment he reaches out and picks up one of the polished beads, holding it between his thumb and forefinger and turning it slowly in the light, and you watch his face soften as he looks at it, the small lines around his eyes deepening slightly in what might be a smile, or might simply be the concentration of someone who is seeing something beautiful, and letting it be beautiful without needing to say anything about it. He puts the bead back down carefully, exactly where he found it, and then he stands up and returns to his place near the mast, and the whole interaction has taken no more than a minute and has not involved a single word. You return to your examination of the amber, sorting the beads by color from the palest yellow to the deepest orange, and then you mix them all together again and start over, arranging them in a circle, and then a square, and then a simple line that curves like the river, a mindless, repetitive activity that occupies your hands while your mind drifts across the same thoughts as smoothly as the river drifts past the hull. The sun has become a diffuse, pale disk behind the high, thin clouds, and its light falls on the deck with a soft, even quality that casts no shadows and makes the whole world look like a painting rendered in muted tones of grey and green and brown, and you feel yourself becoming part of that painting, a still, quiet figure sitting among the cargo on a still, quiet ship that moves almost imperceptibly across a still, quiet river. Time passes, as it always does, but on this wide, slow stretch of the river it passes in a way that is different, less a sequence of minutes and hours, and more a continuous, unbroken flow that carries you along without any sense of beginning or end. You doze for a while, your head nodding forward and your hands relaxing around the amber beads, and when you wake, the ship is in exactly the same position relative to the distant banks, the sail is still full and steady, the helmsman is still standing at the steering oar, and the only indication that any time has passed is the slight change in the quality of the light, which has shifted from the pale, bright grey of midday to the softer grey of afternoon. You stretch your arms and roll your shoulders and take a drink from your water bottle, and then you return to the amber, picking up a piece you have not yet examined, a large, rough nodule that is almost the size of a hen's egg and has a deep reddish-brown color that seems to smolder in the diffuse light. This particular nodule is heavier than the others, and its surface is covered with a thin, chalky crust that flakes away under your thumbnail to reveal the darker, clearer resin beneath, and you spend a long time working at this crust, scraping it gently with your nail and watching the small, pale flakes drift down onto the deck like snow. A slow, meditative task that requires just enough attention to keep you anchored in the present moment, without demanding so much that you cannot also let your thoughts wander. Beneath the crust, the amber is clear and flawless, and when you hold it up to the sky, you can see through it as if it were a window, the grey clouds and the pale sun distorted by the curves of the nodule into a soft, abstract pattern of light and shadow that is constantly changing as you turn the stone in your fingers. You think about the tree that produced this resin, a pine tree that grew in a forest so ancient that the land itself has since been reshaped by ice and water and time, and you think about the slow, patient process by which the sticky sap dripped down the trunk and pooled at the base and was buried under layers of fallen needles and soil and rock, where it hardened and fossilized and waited, without any awareness or purpose, for someone to find it and carry it to this river and hold it up to the grey sky on this quiet afternoon. The afternoon wears on in this way, the ship sliding across the wide, smooth water, the amber beads clicking softly against each other in your palm, the crew resting and dozing and speaking in low, intermittent murmurs that blend into the general hush of the wind and the water. At some point you put the amber back into the chest and close the lid, and slide the chest back into its place beside your sleeping furs, and you lie down on your sheepskin with your hands folded on your chest and your eyes half closed, watching the sail above you as it billows and sags and billows again, with the small gentle variations in the wind. The canvas of the awning has been rolled back today because the weather is fair and you can see the whole sky above you, a great pale dome of cloud that stretches from horizon to horizon. And against this dome, the mast and the yardarm and the sail are dark, solid shapes that seem to be moving while you remain still. Though in truth, it is the ship that moves, and you that are carried. You think about the port at the river's mouth, still many days away, and about the unloading of the cargo and the trading that will follow, and you think about the return journey upstream, which will be slower and harder because the ship will have to be rowed or poled against the current. But these thoughts are distant and abstract, and they drift through your mind like the clouds drift across the sky, forming and dissolving and leaving no trace. The immediate physical reality of the present moment is much more compelling. The softness of the sheepskin beneath you, the gentle rock of the hull, the quiet creak of the rigging, and the deep, bone-tired comfort of being safe and dry and surrounded by goods that have traveled so far and will travel further still. And you let this reality fill your awareness completely, pushing out all other thoughts until there is nothing left but the river and the ship and the steady, peaceful rhythm of your own breathing. When evening begins to approach, and the light takes on the deeper, bluer tone that precedes the twilight, the helmsman stirs from his long stillness and calls out a few quiet words, and the crew rouse themselves and begin the familiar routine of preparing the ship for the night. The sail is lowered and furled, the anchor stone is dropped over the side into the deep, slow-moving water, and the awning is unrolled across its framework of poles, and you help with these tasks as you always do, moving through the familiar sequence of actions with the calm, automatic ease of someone who has done them many times before, and will do them many times again. When everything is secure and the small play oil lamp has been lit and hung from its hook, you settle into your sleeping furs and watch the last of the daylight fade from the sky, and you notice that the wide open basin of the river is so still tonight that the water has become a perfect mirror, reflecting the first faint stars and the thin crescent of the moon with a clarity that makes the ship seem to be floating in a void between two identical skies. And the beauty of this is so quiet and so complete that you do not need to it. A steady, vertical rain begins just before dawn, and you know it has begun even before you are fully awake because the sound of it is the first thing that enters your sleep. A soft, insistent drumming on the canvas awning above your head that weaves itself into your dreams and then gently pulls you out of them, leaving you lying in the warm darkness of your furs with your eyes still closed and your mind slowly registering the change in the world outside. The rain is not a storm, there is no wind to speak of, no thunder, no sudden gusts that shake the ship or slap the canvas against its poles, just a steady, vertical fall of water that descends from the low grey sky with a quiet, unwavering persistence, as if the sky itself had become a vast, slow-dripping sponge that will take all day and all night to empty itself. You open your eyes to the dim, close space beneath the awning, and the first thing you notice is that the light is different this morning, a deeper, bluer grey than the pale, milky grey of yesterday, and the second thing you notice is the smell, which is also different, a smell of damp wool and wet canvas, and the particular, indescribable freshness of rain falling on river water. A smell that is clean and cold and somehow invigorating, even though it asks nothing of yording, even though it asks nothing of you but to lead build to The crew are already awake, moving quietly on the deck beyond the edge of your sleeping space, and through the narrow gap where the awning meets the gunwale, you can see their dark, indistinct shapes as they go about the tasks that the rain has made necessary. They are stringing up additional coverings over the awning, long sheets of oiled leather that they unroll from the bundles stored near the mast, and drape over the framework of poles, overlapping them, like the scales of a fish, so that the rain will slide off and find no gap to seep through. And they secure these leather sheets with toggles and loops and short lengths of tarred twine, working with the same slow, methodical patience they bring to every task, their hands wet and their faces dripping, but their movements unhurried and precise. When they are finished, the space beneath the awning has become a snug, dim, cave-like enclosure that smells powerfully of old leather and linseed oil and the faint, musty sweetness of canvas that has been wet many times before, and the rain now drums on the leather with a deeper, softer sound than it made on the canvas. A sound that is less a tap and more a gentle, muffled thump, as if the sky were beating on a great, stretched drum with fingers made of water. You remain in your nest of furs, perfectly dry, and you pull the woolen blanket up to your chin and settle more deeply into the sheepskin, feeling the warmth of your body trapped beneath the layers of woolen fleece. A warmth that seems more precious and more comforting because of the cold, wet world that presses against the other side of the leather coverings. The space beneath the awning is darker than usual, the small clay oil lamp unlit because there is no point in burning oil during the day, and the only light comes from the narrow gap along the gunwale and from the small opening at the bow, where the awning does not quite close, and this light is grey and watery and trembles with the constant motion of the rain, making the shadows inside the shelter shift and waver in a slow, hypnotic dance. You watch the world outside through the gunwale gap, and what you see is a narrow strip of river and sky reduced to streaks of silver and grey, the rain falling so thickly that the far bank is completely invisible and the near bank is just a dark, blurred shape that might be trees or might be reeds or might be nothing at all, just the darkness of the rain itself. The hours pass in this way, unmarked and unmeasured, the rain falling without pause and the ship drifting downstream with the current. And the only indication that time is moving at all is the gradual change in the quality of the light, which deepens from the pale, watery grey of morning to the darker, heavier grey of afternoon, and then begins to darken further toward the blue-grey of evening. You doze and wake and doze again, never fully losing the awareness of the rain and the ship and the cargo around you, and each time you wake the world is exactly the same as it was when you fell asleep. The same drumming on the leather, the same trickling of water into the bilge, the same patient dark silhouette of the helmsman at the steering oar. And this sameness is not boring, but deeply comforting, a reassurance that nothing has changed, and nothing will change, and the rain will continue to fall, and the ship will continue to fall, and you've partly unmasked of the schrot until you found it essentially aft. At some point in the afternoon, you become aware of a new sound beneath the rain, a soft, rhythmic splashing that is different from the trickle of the runoff and the hiss of the river, and you listen for a moment before you realize that it is the sound of one of the crew bailing water from the bilge, using the wooden scoop that is always kept near the mast for this purpose. The rain has found its way into the ship, despite the oiled leather and the tight caulking, seeping through tiny gaps and running down the inside of the hull to collect in the shallow, curved bottom of the knarr, and the crewman bails it out with slow, steady scoops, lifting the water and tossing it over the side, where it joins the rain and the river and is immediately lost. The sound of the scoop is a regular liquid plash that punctuates the drumming of the rain with a slower, more deliberate rhythm, and you listen to it for a long time, counting the scoops without meaning to, and then the bailing stops and the crewman returns to his resting place, and the only sounds are the rain and the river and the creak of the hull once again. You spend part of the afternoon attending to your own small tasks, not because they need doing, but because it feels good to move your hands and occupy your mind with something simple and familiar. You check the lashings on the woolen bales, running your fingers along the ropes and feeling the slight damp give of the wrappers, which have absorbed moisture from the air but are still sound and will dry quickly when the sun returns. You sniff around the bungs of the oil barrels and find them tight and sweet, the wax seals unbroken. You open the small chest of amber and look at the beads and nodules inside, but you do not take them out because the light is too dim to see their colors properly, and instead you simply rest your palm on the cool, smooth surface of the top layer and feel the faint, pleasant weight of the stones, and then you close the lid and latch it and return the chest to its place. As evening deepens and the light beneath the awning fades from grey to near black, one of the crew lights the small clay oil lamp and hangs it from its hook, and the warm orange glow pushes back the shadows and makes the space feel even more sheltered and intimate than it did before. The rain has not stopped, but it has softened somewhat, the heavy drumming of the afternoon giving way to a lighter, more intermittent patter that is almost gentle, and the hiss of the rain on the river has subsided to a soft, shushing murmur that is barely distinguishable from the other sounds of the night. The crew share a simple meal of flatbread and dry fish and the last of the goat cheese from the river station, and you eat your share slowly, savouring the sharp, tangy taste of the cheese and the clean, cool water from your bottle, and then you settle back into your furs and prepare for sleep. By night, the rain has not stopped, but it has softened further to a fine, steady drizzle that taps gently on the leather coverings with a sound so soft and so constant that it seems to erase all thought, smoothing the edges of your mind like water smoothing a stone. You lie on your back with your blanket pulled up to your chin and your hands folded on your chest, and you listen to the drizzle and the trickle and the distant, almost inaudible flow of the river, and you feel the ship rock beneath you in the slow, deep rhythm that has become as familiar as your own heartbeat. The air beneath the awning is cool and damp, but not cold, and the smell of wet wool and old leather and linseed oil has become a kind of perfume, a scent that you will always associate with this journey and this night and the deep, peaceful rest that is already beginning to claim you. Your thoughts slow and fragment, breaking apart into small disconnected images, the grey streaks of rain through the gunwale gap, the dark silhouette of the helmsman, the warm glow of the oil lamp on the canvas above, and the sound, always the sound, the constant repetitive, deeply calming rhythm of the rain that falls and falls without end, tapping gently against the leather and the water and falls without end, tapping gently against the leather and the water and the ship and your sleeping mind, carrying you down the Tkeich. The rain stopped sometime in the late afternoon of the day before, though you did not mark the exact moment, and the clouds began to thin and break apart just as the sun was setting, so that the evening sky was a patchwork of clearing blue and ragged, retreating grey, and by the time full darkness arrived, the last of the cloud cover had dissolved entirely, leaving behind a sky so clear and so deep that it seemed to have been washed clean by the long rain. The air itself felt washed too, cool and pure and still, with a clarity that made every sound sharper and every outline more distinct, and when you emerged from beneath the awning to help the crew secure the ship for the night, you noticed immediately that the world had changed from the soft, muffled, rain-wrapped place it had been into something crystalline and precise, a world of hard edges and bright points and the faint distant scent of pine resin carried on the motionless air. The knarr had been anchored in a wide, open pool where the river broadened into a nearly circular basin, a place where the current was so slow it was almost imperceptible, and the water was deep and dark and perfectly smooth, and the crew had chosen this spot deliberately, knowing that the clear night would offer good stars for navigation and a safe, sheltered resting place where the ship could drift without dragging its anchor. The anchor stone had been lowered over the side with its usual deep, liquid thump, and the sail had been furled and tied, and the awning had been left partially rolled back so that you could see the sky from your sleeping space, a rare treat on a journey where most nights were cloudy or misty or otherwise obscured. You had spread your sheepskin on the deck with the fleece side up, and you had placed your woolen blanket folded beside you, ready to pull over yourself when the night air grew cold, and then you had lain down on your back with your hands resting on your chest and your face turned upward toward the vast, darkening dome of the heavens. The first star appeared while the sky was still more violet than black, a single, steady point of light that trembled slightly in the thin air just above the dark line of the western forest, and you watched it emerge without any sense of surprise or wonder, simply noting its presence as you might note the return of an old friend who visits every clear evening at this same hour. This star was the evening star, the brightest of all the wandering lights, and you had seen it so many times in so many places that it had become a kind of anchor for your own sense of direction, a fixed point in a moving world that told you where the west lay and where the sun had set and where the sea was waiting at the end of the river. The evening star burned with a cold white-blue light that seemed to pulse very slightly, though you knew this was only the effect of the atmosphere and not any property of the star itself, and it cast a faint silver reflection on the surface of the river that stretched toward the ship like a long wavering path of light, a path that shifted and broke apart with each gentle ripple and then reformed endlessly and patiently. As the violet deepened to a darker shade of purple and then to a black so pure it was almost blue, the other stars began to emerge one by one, then in pairs and clusters, and then in such numbers that you could not have counted them even if you had wanted to. A dense, shimmering carpet of light that spread across the entire dome of the sky from horizon to horizon, with no empty spaces and no dark patches, just an infinite field of tiny brilliant brightness and color, and seemed to tremble with that kind of silent music. Some of the stars were white and cold, some were faintly blue, some had a warm golden tinge, and a very few had a reddish cast that made them seem darker and more distant than the others. And all of them together formed a pattern so complex and so beautiful that it was beyond any human comprehension, though that did not stop your mind from trying to find familiar shapes among the chaos. The river had become so still by now that it reflected the heavens perfectly, creating the illusion that the ship was suspended between two identical skies, one above and one below, with no clear boundary between them except the thin, dark line of the forest on the distant banks, which seemed to float in the middle of the void like a narrow ribbon of solid darkness, separating the two immensities of light. When you looked down over the side of the ship, you could see the stars mirrored in the black water with such clarity that it was difficult to tell which were the real stars and which were the reflections, and the hull of the knarr seemed to be resting on a bed of light, its dark planks surrounded by a field of shimmering points that moved and swayed with the slow, almost imperceptible rocking of the ship. You could see the mast reflected too, a long dark shaft that plunged downward into the starry depths, and you could see the outline of your own head and shoulders against the reflected sky, a dark, featureless shape that seemed to belong to someone else, someone who lived in the upside-down world beneath the water and was looking up at you with the same quiet curiosity. The air was cool and still, so still that you could hear the tiny sounds of the night with a clarity that was almost startling, and you lay without moving, letting these sounds come to you one by one and then fade away, replaced by others equally small and equally perfect. The first sound you noticed was the whisper of your own breathing, a soft, rhythmic rise and fall that was so close and so constant that you usually did not hear it at all. But tonight, in the profound stillness of the clear night, it seemed as loud as the wind in the sail, a gentle, reassuring sound that told you that you were alive and resting and at peace. The second sound was the creak of the ship's timbers, a sound that was always present, but tonight seemed sharper and more distinct, each creak a single isolated note that rose out of the silence and then faded back into it, leaving no echo and no trace. The third sound was the distant, liquid plop of a fish jumping far out in the dark water, a sound that was small and round and perfect, a single note that hung in the air for a moment and then vanished, leaving behind only the knowledge that somewhere out in the starry darkness a fish had broken the surface for reasons known only to itself. You turned your attention to the sky above you and began to trace the familiar constellations, not with any purpose but simply because your eyes wanted something to follow, and your mind wanted something to occupy its slow, drifting thoughts. The first constellation you found was the wagon, the great wheel of stars that turned around the fixed point of the pole star, and you located it by tracing the line of its handle and its four corner stars, which formed a shape that was indeed like a farmer's cart tipped on its side and rolling slowly through the heavens. The wagon was the constellation you had known the longest, the one your father had pointed out to you when you were a child, and you knew its stars by name even though the names were not words that belonged to any spoken language, but rather private labels that existed only in your own memory. The bright one, the red one, the two that are always together, the little one at the end of the handle. Tonight the wagon was high in the northern sky, its handle pointing downward toward the dark line of the forest, and its body tilted at an angle that told you it was still several hours before midnight, for you knew that the wagon turned around the pole star as the night progressed, completing a full circle in the span of a single darkness, and you could read the time by its position as easily as you could read the weather by the smell of the wind. Near the wagon you found the serpent, a long winding chain of stars that stretched across the eastern sky and whose shape was less distinct than the wagon's, but still recognizable once you knew what to look for. a series of bright points that curved and twisted like a snake moving through grass, its head marked by a small, tight cluster of 4 stars and its tail fading away into the fainter stars of the Milky Way. The serpent was a constellation that some people feared and some people revered, and there were many stories about it that you had heard over the years, stories about a great serpent that lived in the sky and devoured the sun during eclipses, or stories about a serpent that guarded a treasure of stars at the center of the galaxy. But tonight, you did not think about these stories. You simply looked at the stars and let them be what they were, a pattern of light against the darkness, and the pattern was enough. The Milky Way itself was visible tonight as a faint, glowing band that stretched from the southern horizon to the northern, a breath of frozen mist that seemed to be made of the light of millions of stars too distant and too faint to be seen individually, their combined radiance creating a soft, diffuse glow that was almost like the light of a very distant, very cold fire. The Milky Way passed directly overhead, and you could see its texture when you looked at it carefully. The way it was not perfectly smooth, but mottled and irregular, with darker patches where clouds of dust blocked the light and brighter patches where clouds of stars were packed more densely together, and the whole thing seemed to shimmer very slightly, as if it were alive and breathing and aware of your gaze. You thought about the fact that the river you were traveling on was sometimes called the Serpent of the Earth, a winding silver line that cut through the forests and the marshes and the hills, and it seemed fitting that there was another serpent in the sky, a river of stars that flowed across the heavens just as the river flowed across the heavens, just as the river flowed across the land, and the two of them were connected in some way that you could not express but could feel, a deep, quiet symmetry that made the world seem whole and complete. Detmati, there were alternators that Schniti bin Ginity. Arte might tuven what and might have been a weapon, or might have been a weapon, or might have been a torch. The great tree, a tall branching pattern that rose from the eastern horizon and whose topmost star was one of the brightest in the sky, a star that flickered with a greenish-blue light when you looked at it directly, and the 2 oxen, a pair of stars that were so together they seemed to be touching and that were said to be brothers. You did not try to remember the stories. You simply let the shapes and the names drift through your mind like leaves on the surface of the river, appearing and then disappearing, replaced by other shapes and other names that rose out of the depths of your memory and then sank back into them without leaving any trace. The night deepened, and the stars wheeled slowly across the arch of the sky with a motion that was almost too slow to perceive, but that you could track if you watched a single star for long enough and noticed that its position relative to the mast had shifted by a finger's width, a hand's width, a forearm's width, as the hours passed in their silent, stately procession. The air grew colder, and you felt it first on your cheeks and on the tips of your ears, and then on your hands where they rested on your chest, and you pulled the woolen blanket up over your body and tucked it around your shoulders, feeling the warmth return slowly, seeping back into your skin from the trapped heat of your body and the thick, insulating wool. The sheepskin beneath you was warm and soft, and the cargo on either side of you was solid and reassuring, the bales of wool and the bundles of hide and the barrels of oil forming a familiar landscape of shadows that you knew by touch and by smell and by the way they blocked the faint starlight that filtered down into your sleeping space. You heard another sound then, a new sound that was not the fish jumping or the ship creaking or your own breathing, a sound that came from the distant shore and that took you a moment to identify. The sharp, high bark of a fox, repeated twice and then followed by silence, a sound that was so clear and so distinct in the still air that it seemed to be happening right beside you, though you knew that the fox was far away, perhaps at the edge of the forest, where the trees met the marsh grass, hunting for voles in the starlight. The bark came again after a long pause, and then a third time, and then there was only the silence and the stars and the gentle, steady rocking of the ship. You lay without moving for a long time, your eyes open and your body still, and you let the night wash over you in slow, gentle waves, the starlight and the silence and the cool, clean air and the familiar, comforting presence of the cargo all around you. Your thoughts had slowed to a pace that matched the movement of the constellations, so slow that they were barely thoughts at all, just a continuous, quiet awareness of the present moment, the feeling of the deck beneath you and the blanket above you and the sky around you, and the knowledge that you were safe and warm and exactly where you were supposed to be. The river rocked the ship in its gentle, patient rhythm, and the stars continued their slow rotation around the pole, and the Milky Way glowed overhead like a breath of frozen light, and you felt yourself beginning to dissolve into the night, your boundaries softening and your mind spreading outward into the darkness until there was no clear distinction between you and the ship and the river and the stars. Just a single, unified, peaceful existence that had no name and no history, and the river and the stars. Just a single, unified, peaceful existence that had no name. You did not notice the moment when sleep arrived, because it did not arrive suddenly, but rather seeped into you gradually, like water seeping into dry earth. And the last thing you were aware of before consciousness faded entirely was the constellation of the wagon, which had moved a little further around the pole star since you had last looked at it, its handle now pointing more toward the west, and its four corner stars burning with a steady, unwavering light that seemed to be watching over you as you slept. The deepest and most restful sleep you had yet experienced on the journey claimed you then, a sleep without dreams and without interruptions, a sleep that was as deep and as dark and as peaceful as the river itself, and you sank into it without resistance, carried downward by the same slow, gentle current that had carried the ship all the long miles from the settlement, and the stars continued their silent, stately dance above you, indifferent and eternal and utterly at peace. When you wake on the 8th morning, something subtle has changed in the air, a difference so faint that you cannot name it at first but only sense it as a slight shift in the quality of the atmosphere, a new note in the familiar blend of smells that have accompanied you down the river. You lie still with your eyes closed, breathing slowly, and you let the air move across your face, cool and clean and carrying, now a hint of something that was not there before, a faint, sharp, almost astringent scent that prickles at the back of your nose and reminds you of the sea, though the sea is still some days away by your reckoning. The scent is not strong. It comes and goes with the light breeze that stirs the canvas awning, sometimes almost disappearing into the older, closer smells of wool and wood and river water, and then returning again with a fresh, clean edge that makes you think of wave-washed rocks and the vast open expanses of salt water that lie somewhere ahead, beyond the marshes and the dunes and the wide, slow estuary. You open your eyes and sit up, pushing the blanket aside, and you notice immediately that the light this morning is different too, paler and more diffuse, as if the sky had expanded overnight and pulled the clouds thinner across a broader dome, and the result is a soft, silvery brightness that fills the space beneath the awning with a gentle, even glow, washing out the shadows and making everything look slightly washed and faded, like a painting left too long in the sun. You crawl to the edge of the awning and look out across the water, and what you see confirms what the scent in the air has already told you. The river has grown even wider than before, so wide now that the far bank is barely visible as a low, dark smudge on the horizon, and the near bank, which was once a solid wall of pine and birch, has thinned and changed into something altogether different. The forests that have accompanied you for so many days, those endless stands of dark, straight trunks and interlocking branches, have given way to wide marshes and low, grassy dunes that roll gently down to the water's edge, their slopes covered with coarse, pale green grass and patches of low, salt-tolerant shrubs that you do not know the names of, but recognize by their small, leathery leaves and their twisted, wind-shaped branches. The air above these marshes is filled with birds, not the single cuckoo or the occasional woodpecker of the forest, but flocks of seabirds that wheel and turn in slow, circling patterns against the pale sky, their wings long and pointed, and their calls a new sound, high and repetitive, and distinctly different from any bird sound you have heard on the journey so far. These calls drift across the water to the ship, thin and distant and somehow plaintive, and you watch the birds for a long time, following their slow circles with your eyes and listening to their cries, which seem to be a conversation carried on across great distances, a conversation that has been going on since long before you arrived and will continue long after you have gone. The water itself has changed too, and you notice this when you lean over the gunwale and look down at the surface, which is no longer the pale milky green of the upper river, or the dark mirror-like black of the clear night pool, but a deeper, more complex color, a greenish-brown tint that comes from the stirred silt of the estuary, where the fresh water of the river meets the salt water of the sea, and the two mix together in slow, swirling patterns that you can see if you look carefully, broadly trails of lighter and darted water. Did never quite to then the current has slowed even more than before, becoming sluggish and unpredictable, and you can feel this in the way the ship moves. The long, smooth glide of the middle river, replaced now by a heavier, more rolling motion that seems to come not from the flow of the water, but from some deeper, slower force. The pulse of the tide pushing upstream against the river's outflow, lifting the hull and then letting it settle, lifting and settling in a rhythm that is slower and more deliberate than anything you have felt before. The crew are aware of these changes too, and they move about the deck this morning with a new kind of attention, not a hurry, but a careful, methodical tidiness that you have not seen since the early days of the journey, coiling ropes more neatly than usual and retying knots that have loosened, adjusting the lashings on the cargo and checking the condition of the sail and the rigging and the steering oar, with the quiet, focused of people who know that the character of the journey is shifting and that the ship must be prepared for wise ahead. One of them walks the length of the cargo space, touching each bale of wool and each bundle of hide with the flat of his hand, feeling for dampness or shifting or any sign that the goods have been affected by the changing air, and he pauses beside you and gives a small nod that says everything is as it should be, and then he moves on to the barrels of seal oil, tapping each one with his knuckle and listening to the sound, which is deep and unchanged. The nations, for I besettered as necessity company and part of the journey, and you notice that the crew are also watching the water more than usual, their eyes moving constantly to the surface and tants, reading the river for signs of sandbars or submerged obstacles, or changes in the channel, for the estuary is staly, is siltate, and hidden shill howls, and the Hesno has meant must work hard and to keep the ship in the deep eats. Narration strike in the state error, but it's spat made in developed but averted attribute to never what is it. The scent of salt grows stronger as the morning progresses, no longer a faint intermittent hint, but a steady, pervasive presence in the air, and with it comes a new taste on your lips when you run your tongue across them, a faint dry saltiness that reminds you of the sea spray you have tasted on coastal voyages in your past. Though here there is no spray and no waves, only the slow, heavy roll of the estuary water and the distant rhythmic sigh of the tide pushing against the river's mouth somewhere ahead. You take a drink from your water bottle and the fresh water tastes different against the salt on your lips, sweeter and cleaner, and you drink more than you intended, letting the cool liquid wash the salt away and leave your mouth fresh. The first piece of driftwood bobs past the ship in the late morning, a long, smooth branch that has clearly travelled a great distance, its bark worn away entirely and its wood bleached to a silvery grey by sun and salt and the constant, patient abrasion of the water. You watch it approach from upstream, turning slowly in the current, and it passes alongside the hull with a soft, barely audible bump, and then it continues on its way downstream, heading for the sea and whatever distant shore it will eventually wash up on. And you think about all the other pieces of driftwood that must be floating in this estuary, all the branches and logs and fragments of trees that have fallen into the river over countless years and been carried here to the meeting place of fresh water and soul, where they will drift and turn and smald, of statuier of that flow the oldest. The reeds along the shoreline have changed too, and you notice this when the ship passes close to a long, low spit of land that juts out into the water, a place where the river has deposited a broad shelf of silt and sand, and the reeds that grow there are not the tall green stalks of the upper river, but shorter, stiffer plants with bleached, pale yellow stems and feathery tops that are almost white in the grey light, and they rustle in the breeze with a dry, papery sound that is journey. These reeds have a different smell too, a sharper, more mineral smell that mingles with the salt in the air and the faint, muddy scent of the exposed silt flats, where the tide has fallen and left behind a dark, glistening expanse of mud that is pocked with the holes of burrowing creatures and crisscrossed with the delicate, three-toed tracks of wading birds. The sky has opened up so completely by midday that it seems to have no boundaries at all, a vast, pale dome of thin cloud and diffused sunlight that stretches from horizon to horizon without a single break or variation, and against this enormous empty sky, the slow circling shapes of the gulls are the only moving things. Their wings catching the light and flashing white, and then dark and then white again, as they turn and wheel and call out to each other with those high repetitive cries that have become, in just a few hours, a dat benhadet nerd. You watch the gulls for a long time, tracing their patterns with your eyes and noticing how they never seem to land, how they just keep circling and calling and circling again, and you wonder if they are waiting for something, or if this endless, patient circling is simply what they do, a life lived entirely in the air above the meeting place of river and sea. The ship's motion has become heavier and more rolling as the day wears on, the hull lifting on the slow swells of the incoming tide and then settling back with a deep groaning creak of the timbers, and this motion is different from the gentle cradling rock of the river in a way that you feel in your stomach and in the muscles of your legs, which must work slightly harder to keep you balanced when you stand or walk across the deck. You do not feel sick, only aware of a ship as a living thing that is responding to forces greater than itself, and you place your hand on the nearest bale of wool and feel the vibration of the hull transmitted through the cargo, a deep, low, almost subaudible hum that is the voice of the estuary speaking through the wood and the wool and into the bones of your hand. The crew have finished their tidying and their checking, and now they sit or stand in their usual places, watching the water and the sky and the distant, changing shoreline with the same patient, unhurried attention they have given to every phase of the journey. And you notice that they are speaking more often now, not loud conversations but quiet, intermittent exchanges about the depth of the channel and the strength of the tide and the best place to anchor for the night. For the night, practical seafaring talk that you isn't to without anything your wits out. Short fight is the Albany states. The helmsman calls out at depth, his voice low and calm and carrying easily across the deck, and one of the oarsmen responds with a nod and a quiet word, and then they both fall silent again, their attention returning to the river and the tide and the slow, endless work of keeping the ship safe. The afternoon passes in this way, the ship moving steadily downstream through the estuary, the salt scent growing stronger, and the water taking on more and more of the character of the sea, the waves becoming slightly larger and more regular, the color deepening to a dark, opaque brownish green, and the birds increasing in number until the sky is full of their circling shapes and the air is full of their cries, a constant, high-pitched chorus that is not unpleasant but simply different, a new kind of landscape. You sit in your usual spot with your back against the barrel, and you watch the shoreline slide past, the low dunes and the wide marshes and the occasional small stunted tree that has managed to survive in the salty soil, its branches twisted and leaning inland, away from the prevailing wind, and you think about all the miles of river that lie behind you now, all the forests and the reeds and the quiet, starlit pools, and they seem very far away and very long ago, though it has only been a handful of days. And reading a bit against with an inks and it's the witches read it Shreetreath and its interior dotted with the dark, low shapes of nesting birds, and the anchor stone is dropped into the shallow, muddy water with a soft, sucking splash, and the ship settles into the resting place with a deep, slow groan of the hull, the motion of the tide rocking in dent. The knarr rounds a final, low headland of dune grass and sand in the late morning, the ship moving so slowly now that the motion feels less like travelling and more like drifting into a place that has been waiting for you all along. This headland is a long, low finger of land that reaches out into the estuary, its surface covered with coarse, pale green marram grass that shifts and ripples in the light breeze, and its shore is a broad, flat beach of pale sand that shelves gently into the water, where small, low waves break with a soft, rhythmic hush, the first true sea waves you have encountered on the journey. Their sound the gentle, repetitive whisper that seems to welcome the shelter of the bay. The headland itself is unremarkable, just a low rise of sand and grass and a few wind-twisted shrubs, but it marks a boundary, the final turning point before the port town, and as the knarr slides past its outermost tip and the bay opens up before you, you feel a quiet, deep sense of arrival that is not excitement but something closer to recognition. The feeling of reaching a place you have held in your mind for many days and finding it exactly as you remembered. The port town spreads along the shore of the sheltered bay in a long, low line of wooden buildings that seem to have grown out of the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. Their dark, weathered timbers blending into the grey-green of the dunes and the pale, silvery water of the harbour, and the whole settlement has the look of something that has been there for a very long time, built and rebuilt over generations, always in the same way and with the same materials, until it has become as much a part of the coast as the sand and the grass, and the coast at the sand and the grass at the slide that a mice made the second trick. In other time the sons and mines which in my the times, the right houses where vessels are repaired and stored through the winter. Warehouses raised on timber pilings to keep them above the highest tides, their broad sloping roofs covered with teak slabs of turf that have greened over with moss and small hardy plants, and wooden jetties that extend out into the calm water, like strial, which smile, so better skill cried aid zail, the sky above the port is a soft, uniform grey that merges with the calm water of the harbour at the horizon, so that there is no clear line where the sea ends and the air begins. Just a gradual, seamless transition from the dark, rippled surface of the bay to the pale, luminous dome of cloud. And this lack of boundary gives the whole scene a dreamlike quality, as if the town and the ships and the jetties were all floating in a single unified element that is neither water nor air, but side that is called thee. The light is soft and diffuse and casts no shadows, and the colours of the port are all muted, the dark brown of the timber, the pale grey of the sky, the silvery green of the water, and the occasional subdued flash of colour from a painted door or a stack of dyed cloth left on a dock, and the overall effect is one of quiet, peaceful stillness, a place where everything moves slowly or not at all. The crew it be biddings frightened is a net. It's empty waters that semming quiles into the pythe. The helmsman calls out a single soft word of the bay. The helmsman calls out a single soft word, and the oarsmen towardsmen take up their long sweeps, the heavy oars that are used for manoeuvring in close quarters, their blades dipping into the water with a slow woe stroke, just drought that stemmy could stand to the water with chirp, distort for a stay to dub or to step, stirred but spurted for ebovit flat. The sail is lowered with the same careful, unhurried sequence of actions you have witnessed so many times on the journey, the yardarm descending the mast in a series of smooth, steady pulls, the heavy woolen cloth gathering in the arms of the crew and being furled and tied with leather cords, and the ship slows further as the wind no longer pushes against the sail, settling into a gentle gliding motion that carries it toward the pier with the momentum of its own weight and the faint residual push of the current. The helmsman unhips the steering oar from its bracket, lifting the long, heavy blade out of the water and laying it carefully along the deck, for it will not be needed in the close quarters of the docking, and instead 2 of the crew take up the long poles and move to the bow, where they stand ready to fend off or push against the pier as needed, their bodies balanced and their eyes fixed on the approaching timber structure. The begynnelsen of thits, either mightemwine, another crest and something. The pier is a nidesness, and the knarr draws closer. You can see the details of its construction, the iron brackets that reinforce the corners, the heavy wooden bollards shaped like thick waist-high mushrooms, the coils of rope hung and dace along the edge, and the small dark shapes of the dockworkers, the ship's lines. 3 or 4 men and 1 more the gretched it kelt the. The docking itself is a slow, patient dance that unfolds without any hurry or confusion, each person knowing their role and performing it with the ease of long practice. One of the crew tosses a coiled rope to a dockworker, who catches it without any visible effort and loops it over a bollard with a smooth, practiced motion, and then another rope is thrown and caught and looped, and the ship is pulled gently toward the pier by the dockworkers, who haul on the lines hand over hand, their movements slow and steady, the muscles of their arms and shoulders working beneath their woolen tunics, but their faces remaining calm and untroubled. The crew on the ship use the long poles to guide the hull the last few feet, pressing against the pier and then releasing, and the knarr comes to rest against the heavy wooden fenders that have been hung over the side, the hull making contact with a soft, muffled thump that you feel through the deck as a low, deep vibration, and then the ship is still, truly still, for the first time in many days, its long journey downstream complete. You stand on the deck for a moment, looking at the pier and the warehouses and the quiet activity of the port, and you feel a strange, gentle dislocation. The awareness that you have spent so long on the moving river that stillness has become unfamiliar, and your body is still rocking slightly with the remembered motion of the water, even though the ship is now tied fast to the dock. The gangplank is run out from the pier to the gunwale, a broad, sturdy plank of oak with cleats nailed across it for grip, and you watch as one of the crew walks across it and onto the pier, his steps steady and sure, and then another follows, and then it is your turn, and you pick up your small leather pouch of personal belongings and step across the gap, feeling the solid, unmoving planks of the pier beneath your feet for the first time in more than a week. The sensation is peculiar and disorienting. The way the ground seems to sway slightly beneath you, rising and falling with a phantom echo of the river's motion, and you stand still for a long moment, waiting for your body to adjust, your legs feeling strange and heavy and somehow disconnected from the earth, as if they had forgotten how to stand on something that does not move. The dock workers pay you no attention, accustomed as they are to the unsteady gait of newly arrived sailors, and after a short while the sensation begins to fade and the world settles into a new kind of stability, the solid, unmoving reality of the land replacing the fluid, living motion of the river, and you take a few experimental steps along the pier and find that your legs remember how to walk, after all, though they still feel slightly foreign to you, as if they belong to someone else who has been ashore all along. There follows a long, peaceful afternoon of unloading, a process so slow and so methodical that it seems to stretch the hours into a single, continuous, unhurried flow of time, and you participate in it without any sense of urgency, carrying and counting and stacking alongside the crew and the dock workers, your body moving through the familiar tasks with the same calm, automatic ease it has developed over the many days of the journey. The bales of woolen wadmal are unloaded first, each one lifted by two people and carried across the gangplank to the pier, where they are stacked on a small handcart with high wooden sides and sturdy iron wheels, and from there they are wheeled along the pier and into the open doorway of the nearest warehouse, a long, low building that smells of dry grain and old wood and the faint, pleasant mustiness of a space that has sheltered goods for many years. The warehouse interior is dim and cool, lit only by the grey light that filters through the open doorway and a few small, high windows set under the eaves, and the floor is made of wide planks that have been worn smooth and dark by the passage of countless feet and the resting of countless cargoes, and the bales of wool are stacked against the far wall, their coarse linen wrappers pale against the dark timber, each one placed carefully and then counted in a quiet voice by a dock worker with a wooden tally stick. The bundles of cured reindeer hide come next, lighter than the wool but more aqueous vestal, falling thinkle a familiar smoky smell of the cured leather close to your face, and the slight, springy give of the hides beneath their leather thongs when you place it on the handcart beside the woolen bales and then return to the ship for another, moving back and forth a granks, and slow steady rhythm, the chacking and plank in a slow chair and mispate and boastus. The hides are counted and tallied and then carried into a different warehouse, one that is slightly smaller and smells more strongly of leather and smoke, and they are stacked on wooden pallets that keep them off the floor and allow air to circulate around them, preventing damp and rot during their time in storage. The barrels of seal oil are unloaded next, and these are the heaviest items in the cargo, their weight making the ship settle noticeably in the water as each one is lifted away, and they are rolled rather than carried, guided carefully down the gangplank with ropes, and then rolled along the pier to a low, windowless storehouse where other barrels are already stacked, their dark, oil-stained staves and rusty iron hoops blending into the dimness of the interior. Each barrel makes a deep, hollow sound as it is rolled across the planks, a sound that is heavy and solid and somehow satisfying, and you watch as they are lined up against the wall of the storehouse, their bungs checked one last time and their seals confirmed intact, and then the door of the storehouse is closed and latched, and the barrels are left in the cool, dark quiet to wait for the day when they will be traded or used. The small iron-cornered chest of amber is the last item to be unloaded, and you carry it yourself, refusing the help of the dock workers because this chest has been your particular charge throughout the journey and you want to see it safely into the warehouse with your own hands. The chest is heavy, heavier than it looks, and its iron corners press into your palms as you carry it across the gangplank and along the pier, feeling the familiar, solid weight of the amber inside, the same weight you have felt on your lap during the long, quiet afternoons on the river, and you carry it into the same warehouse where the wool bales are stacked, and place it on a low wooden shelf near the back wall, where it will be safe and dry and easily found when it is needed. You open the lid one last time and look at the beads and nodules inside, their honey-coloured surfaces glowing faintly in the dim light, and then you close the lid and latch it and leave the chest on its shelf, a small, quiet treasure among the larger, more ordinary goods. The unloading continues through the afternoon, the dockworkers and the crew moving back and forth between the ship and the warehouses with the same slow, steady pace, and you help where you are needed, carrying a bundle of hides here and rolling a barrel there and stacking bales of wool until your arms ache with a pleasant, tired heaviness. And through it all, there is no rush and no noise and no confusion. Just the quiet, methodical transfer of goods from the ship to the shore, a process that the light begins to fade slowly as the afternoon turns toward evening, the pale, silvery grey of the sky deepening to a darker, softer grey that makes the shadows inside the warehouses grow longer and the faces of the workers harder to see, and by the time the last barrel has been rolled into the storehouse and the last bale has been stacked against the wall, the day has almost ended and the port is settling into the quiet rhythms of the night. The crew have finished their work and are gathering on the pier, talking quietly among themselves, and you stand with them for a moment, feeling the cool, salt-tinged evening air on your face and listening to the soft, rhythmic slap of the water under the docks, a sound that is so similar to the sounds of the river and yet different, a deeper, more resonant note that speaks of the sea and the tide and the vast open waters that lie just beyond the bay. One of the dock workers, the woman who caught the first rope when the ship arrived, approaches you and speaks in a low, calm voice, offering you a place to sleep for the night, a bed of fresh straw in a quiet corner of the main warehouse, and you accept with a nod and a quiet word of thanks, grateful for the shelter and the chance to rest on solid ground after so many nights on the moving river. She leads you into the warehouse, through the dim, quiet space where the wool bales are stacked, and the chest of amber rests on its shelf, to a corner near the back wall where a thick layer of clean yellow straw has been spread over the planks, and she points to it and then leaves you there, disappearing back into the grey evening light of the doorway. You spread your sheepskin over the straw and unroll your woolen blanket, arranging your sleeping place with the same careful, familiar motions you have used every night of the journey, and then you lie down and pull the blanket over you, feeling the straw shift and settle beneath your weight. It smells sweet and dry and somehow summery, a smell of hayfields and harvest and the long golden days of the year's turning. The warehouse is dark now except for the faint grey rectangle of the open doorway, through which you can see the knarr still tied to the pier, its mast a dark vertical line against the lighter darkness of the sky, its hull rising and falling very slightly with the gentle swell of the harbour, resting after its long journey, and the sight of it there, so close and so familiar, is deeply comforting. A reminder that the ship and the cargo and the crew are all safe, and all at peace, and that tomorrow will bring whatever the ship and the cargo heed the knell of toa tripault. The warehouse settles into its own quiet rhythm as the last of the evening light fades from the open doorway, that grey rectangle slowly dimming from pale silver to a deeper, softer charcoal, and then to a darkness that is almost indistinguishable from the darkness of the interior, until the only light in the whole long building comes from a single hanging oil lamp that someone has lit and hung from a hook near the main doors, its flame a small, steady point of orange that casts a gentle, wavering glow at the nearest bales of wool and leafsanadifsrud. The lamp smells of seal oil and faint smoke, the same smell that has accompanied you on the ship throughout the journey, and it is a comfort to have it here in this unfamiliar but not unwelcoming place, a small continuity between the world of the river and the world of the shore. The flame moves slightly with the draughts that pass through the warehouse, its light trembling on the dark planks of the walls and the high, beamed ceiling, and the shadows it casts are long and slow and hypnotic, shifting back and forth in a rhythm that is almost like the rocking of the ship, a quiet, visual echo of the motion you have lived with for so many days. You lie on the bed of straw that the dock worker showed you, your sheepskin spread beneath you and your woolen blanket pulled up to your chest, and the straw crackles softly whenever you shift your weight, a dry, papery sound that is surprisingly loud in the stillness of the warehouse, but not startling, just another texture in the quiet tapestry of the night. The straw has a smell that is entirely different from the smells of the river, a sweet, dry, golden smell that reminds you of haymaking in the high summer meadows, of warm sun and the buzz of insects and the slow, patient work of cutting and turning and stacking the grass into tall, fragrant heaps. And this smell is so vivid and so evocative that it carries you for a moment back to a different time and a different place, a farmstead far inland where the river was just a narrow stream and the sea was a story told by travelers. But the memory is soft and distant, and it fades almost as soon as it appears, leaving behind only the pleasant, residual feeling of warmth and safety, and the knowledge that you have slept on straw many times before and will sleep on it many times again. The cargo that was your companion on the river now rests on wooden pallets and shelves around you, the bales of wool and the bundles of hide and the barrels of oil, and the small iron-cornered chest of amber, and they form a familiar landscape of shadows in the dim light of the hanging lamp. Their shapes known to you even in the darkness, their presence a quiet, solid reassurance that nothing has been lost and nothing has been damaged and the journey has ended exactly as it should have. The bales of wadmal are stacked against the far wall, their coarse linen wrappers pale in the gloom, and if you look at them carefully you can see the faint, dark marks of the settlement's storage stamps, the same simple geometric designs you traced with your fingers on the first morning of the voyage, and the sight of them now, here in this foreign warehouse, gives you a small, quiet sense of completion, the feeling of a circle closing, a responsibility discharged. The chest of amber sits on its low wooden shelf, its iron corners catching the lamplight in small dull gleams, and you know that inside it the beads and nodules are resting just as you left them, their honey-colored glow hidden in the darkness, but still there, still warm, still ancient, still waiting. The warehouse itself is a long, low building constructed of heavy timber posts and beams, its walls made of thick planks that have been weathered by many seasons of salt air and sea mist until they are a deep silvery grey, and its roof is laid with broad slabs of turf that have greened over with moss and small hardy plants, creating a living, breathing cover that insulates the interior and muffles the sounds from outside, so that the space feels sheltered and protected, a quiet cocoon of wood and earth and the patient, enduring presence. The floor is made of wide, thick planks that have been worn smooth by the passage of countless feet and the dragging of countless cargoes, and they creak softly as the building settles into the cool of the night, the timbers contracting and shifting with small, quiet sounds that are so slow and so irregular that they seem more like the breathing of the warehouse itself than any kind of disturbance. A gentle, restful sound that reminds you of the creak of the ship's hull at anchor disturbance. A gentle, restful ausschrakt of the iak of that. The air inside the warehouse is cool and dry, and smells of old wood and stored grain, and the faint, pleasant mustiness of the space that has been used for this purpose for many years. And beneath these smells there is the lingering, faint scent of the wool bales and the cured hides and the seal oil, a reminder of the journey that brought you here. You turn onto your side and fold your arm under your head, and through the open doorway you can see the knarr still tied to the pier, its dark shape resting on the slightly lighter darkness of the harbour water, its mast rising like a single slender tree against the night sky. The ship moves very slightly, with the gentle swell that rolls in from the bay, a motion that is almost too subtle to see, but that you can sense just by watching, the way the mast sways a fraction to the left and then back again, the way the hull lifts and settles with a rhythm that is slower and deeper than the river's rhythm, a rhythm that belongs to the sea. The sight of the ship there, so close and so familiar, is deeply comforting, and you keep your eyes on it for a long time, watching it sway and rock and rest after its long journey. The ship that carried you and the cargo and the crew through the forests and the marshes and the wide open stretches of the river. The ship that sheltered you in the rain and beneath the stars and in the soft grey fog of the morning. the ship that has been your home and your companion and your means of passage, through a world that now lies behind you, a world of water and tide. The sounds of the port at night are different from the sounds of the river, and you lie still and listen to them, letting them wash over you one by one, familiarizing yourself with this new acoustic landscape as you have familiarized yourself with every other landscape on the journey. The first and most constant sound is the gentle rhythmic slap of water under the docks, a sound that is deeper and more resonant than the river's lapping, the harbour water moving between the pilings with a slow liquid sucking sound that rises and falls in a regular pattern, a sound that has been here since long before the port was built, and will be here long after, the voice of the tide speaking to the land. The second sound is the distant intermittent creak of another ship's rigging somewhere further along the pier, a sound that is so similar to the creak of the knarr's own rigging that it might be the same ship, the same ropes and blocks and spars moving in the same faint breeze, and you hear it and recognize it and let it go, a familiar note in an unfamiliar symphony. The third sound is the occasional muffled voice of a night watchman passing by outside, a low, calm voice that speaks a few words and then falls silent, and you cannot make out the words, but the tone is unhurried and unconcerned, the voice of someone who is simply doing their rounds and who knows that all is well and all is quiet and there is nothing to report. You hear these sounds and you let them be, not clinging to them or analyzing them, but simply allowing them to exist. And after a while they blend together into a continuous, soft background that is not silence, but something close to it, a gentle ambient texture that wraps around you and holds you and makes the warehouse feel less like a strange, unfamiliar place, and more like a new kind of shelter, a land-bound equivalent of the snug, canvas-covered space beneath the ship's awning, a place where you can rest and be saved from the narrate. Your mind drifts back over the journey now, not as a series of distinct events, but as a continuous flowing memory of water and sky, a single unbroken ribbon of sensation that begins at the wooden wharf of the settlement and ends here, in this quiet warehouse by the sea. You remember the pale milky green water of the upper river in the early morning, the way it slid past the hull with a smooth, glassy motion that seemed to have no beginning and no end, and you remember the dark, straight trunks of the pine trees passing in their endless procession, their roots exposed where the river had cut gently into the bank. You remember the sound of the rain on the canvas awning, the soft, steady drumming that filled the whole world and erased all thought, and you remember the clear night when the stars reflected on the still water and the ship seemed to float between two identical skies, the constellations wheeling slowly overhead while you lay on your back and watched them move. You remember the smell of the amber in your palm, the faint, resinous scent of ancient pine forests that rose from the rough nodules when you rubbed them, and you remember the taste of the flatbread and dried fish, the simple, honest flavors of the journey that you ate leaning against the barrel beside your sleeping space. You remember the faces of the crew, calm and quiet and deeply familiar, even though you have only known them for a handful of days. Their low voices and their slow, practiced movements and their patient, wordless companionship. And you remember the helmsman at the steering oar, his eyes fixed on some distant point, and his hands moving the oar in that slow, rhythmic pattern that kept the ship in the deepest part of the channel. These memories flow through your mind without any effort or direction, one image merging into the next, and you let them come and go as they please, not holding on to any of them, but not pushing them away either, simply observing them with the same detached, peaceful attention with which you observe the river flowing past the hull. The journey feels now like a long, slow dream from which you have only just awoken, a dream that was full of quiet beauty and simple, repetitive rhythms, and the deep, bone-tired comfort of being carried without effort toward a destination you trusted completely, and the thought of it fills you with a gentle, diffuse warmth that spreads through your chest and your limbs and makes your body feel heavy and soft and deeply relaxed. Your body still sways with the phantom motion of the river, even here on the solid, unmoving planks of the warehouse floor, and you feel it most strongly when you close your eyes, the sense that you are still moving, still being rocked by the current, still held in the large, patient hand of the water that carried you for so many miles. The straw beneath you seems to lift and fall with the same slow, gentle rhythm, and your inner ear still expects the creak of the mast and the hush of the bow wave, and the part of your mind that governs balance has not yet adjusted to the stillness of the land, so that you are caught between two realities: the reality of the present moment, where you lie motionless on a bed of straw in a quiet warehouse, and the reality of the present moment, where you lie motionless on a bed of straw in a quiet warehouse, and the reality of the journey of living, breathing thing, breathe. This sensation is not unpleasant. It is a kind of lullaby, a fading echo of the journey that rocks you even as you lie still, and you surrender to it without resistance, letting your body remember the river, even as your mind prepares for sleep. There is nothing left to do now, no cargo to check, no lashings to tighten, no watch to keep, and the knowledge of this is itself a kind of release, the final letting go of the responsibilities that have shaped your days and nights since the ship pushed off from the settlement wharf. You have carried the amber and counted the hides and checked the seals and the oil barrels, and now the goods are safely stored in the warehouse. The ship is safely tied to the pier, and the crew are safely ashore, and all that remains is for you to rest, to let the tiredness that has accumulated over the long days of travel settle into your bones and pull you down into a sleep that is as deep and as peaceful as the river itself. The thought is so simple and so complete that it fills your mind entirely, leaving no room for anything else. And you feel a profound, quiet contentment that is not happiness in any loud or dramatic sense, but rather a deep, steady, unshakable peace, the peace of arrival, the peace of completion, the peace of knowing that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. You adjust your position one last time, turning onto your other side so that you face the interior of the warehouse rather than the open doorway, and you pull the blanket up around your shoulders and tuck the edge under your chin, feeling the wool soft and warm against your skin. And then you close your eyes and let your body go heavy and loose, sinking into the straw and the sheepskin and the solid, unmoving planks of the floor. The sounds of the port continue outside, the slap of the water and the creak of the rigging, and the distant, muffled voice of the watchman, but they seem to be growing fainter now, receding into the background as your awareness narrows and focuses inward, turning away from the external world and toward the quiet, dark interior of your own mind. Your breathing slows and deepens, becoming as regular and as rhythmic as the oars dipping into the river. Each inhalation a gentle rise, each exhalation a soft release, and you follow this rhythm for a while, letting it carry you further and further from the waking world, the boundary between thought and dream becoming thinner and more porous with each passing moment. The last conscious sensation you register before sleep claims is climbing in the fears current that is flows just beyond the warehouse wall, and you realize with the last faint flicker of awareness that the river is still there and always will be, that it will continue to flow through the forests and the marshes and into the sea, carrying other ships and other travelers and other cargoes. On Rum, Bryfort sort, in quite an endless, the door det slat hate, that gets